Well then, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name's Sarah Hill, and I am Chairman of the committee. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and also will be available for viewing after the meeting. So I'd ask people who speak to use the microphones when speaking and remember to turn it off when they're finished speaking. From this morning, I would remind people that if there is a fire alarm, that the assembly point is the cricket pitch, which is outside the car park over there. We shouldn't have two in one day, one hopes, but you never know. I sincerely hope not. First item on the agenda are the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of June. I propose the minutes of these meetings are taken, confirmed, read and signed by myself. Agreed? Thank you. Questions. Question time. I've received a number of questions from members of the public which relate to items 8, 9 and 10 on the agenda. Therefore, we'll address those when we get to consider those individual items. Some of the questions are statements. Some are asking members to take things into consideration. So we'll probably do them as part of the deliberations. This committee doesn't actually have a members of the public question time, so it all gets a bit difficult to deal with. But I think that's going to be the simplest way to allow us to keep moving through the items on the agenda. Questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I haven't received any. There aren't any other urgent items. I will ask for declarations of interest, please. Councillor Iron.
I wish to declare an interest in all items on the agenda as a salaried GP.
Thank you. Any others? Okay. Thank you. I assume there are no declarations of the party whip. Thank you. I've not received any petitions. So we move to item 8, which is an update on Better Care Together, which runs between pages 13 and 44 of the agenda. We'll start off by asking Mary Barber, who's the Programme Director of Better Care Together, to sort of take us on by this. Who have you managed to get with you then, Mary?
Jane and Andy are going to join me in case there are any questions about Market Harbour.
OK, well, we've got Jane Chapman from East Leicestershire and Rutland CCG and Andy Donohue's from NHS Property Services. There's also a supplementary paper, members, about St Luke's in Market Harbour, and the question from Mrs Baker, which you've also had, which is asking us to take things into account. So I would ask us that we did so as part of our deliberations. And because this is quite a big paper and it covers all the county and lots of different bits of the county, I think if we start off by just looking at the community services offer, which is Appendix 1, after we've had the introduction, which is pages 17 to 32. Then we'll look at Hinckley, and then we'll look at the East Rutland and CCG stuff last. That way, it's easy for the people taking minutes.
Chairman, on the point of order, you have asked everyone to speak clearly. We at the back can't hear what's being said now through a microphone. I'm sure everyone in this room can hear me without a microphone.
OK. We'll turn them up. Hang on. Yeah, he may well whistle, if I can remember how to do this. Which one is it? There's a volume. Yeah, hang on.
There might be feedback, though, if they're too loud. Just
OK, we'll carry on. Is that any better? OK. How's that? Is that better? It's definitely louder, yeah. I can hear it louder myself. So I'll go back. OK. We've got Mary Barker, who's the who's Programme Director for Better Care Together, who's going to take the lead on it. And then we've got Jane Chapman from East Leicestershire and Rutland Clinical Care Group and Andy Donohue from NHS Property Services. We've had extra information about St Luke's Hospital in Market Harbour and a question from Mrs Baker, which asks us as members to ask questions. And what I'm proposing is that we, as part of our questioning later and discussion, is take that into account and cover those items. It's a big topic and there's a lot to cover here, so I'm going to take it in 3 parts. The community services offer, which after the introduction is pages 17 to 32, and that's the overall structure and shape of what's trying to be done and how it's being done. Then we'll look at 2 specific things, Hinckley Community Hospitals, which is specifically referred to, and what's going on in East Leicestershire and Rutland, their community services strategy. So if you would like to start off and introduce it, Mary, we'll take it from there.
Okay, and I will speak clearly and slowly. But if you can't hear me, then please shout, and I will either raise my voice or repeat what I've already said. So, community services. We are going through a process of looking at community services and how they are delivered across the whole of Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland under the umbrella of the Better Care Together programme. We have a number of goals within the Better Care Together programme, which include, and probably at its top, is to provide higher quality care across the counties and the city, to reduce the level of inequalities that there are across the counties and the city, and to have a sustainable system. Because in the longer term, you can't have high quality care if you don't have a sustainable system. So those three goals are intertwined, and all of the activities that we plan to enact over the next 5 years are aimed at achieving that for this region and for Rutland and for the city. Talk a little bit about about community care and community hospitals specifically. So we have said, and it's already out there in the public domain, that we will shift services out of acute hospitals into community and primary care. And we will do that in a number of different ways. And we'll use a combined approach of improvements in prevention, in social care, in primary care, in community care, and in the acute hospitals themselves in order to achieve that shift. You'll see, if you look at some of the evidence base behind changes to community services, that where people try to do changes to community services in isolation, they are often not as successful as people desire them to be. And where in the past, across Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland, we've tried to make changes to the acute hospitals in isolation, the issue is that they can't move because they haven't got the headroom to move unless the care that they provide is provided somewhere else in a different way. So we are using this combined approach, and the Better Care Together partnership involves nine organisations, the providers, the CCGs, and all of the local authorities. One of the big changes you'll see is a change to the acute services. So in time, University Hospitals Leicester will go from 3 hospitals to 2. It will only do that when the services provided by the 3 hospitals can be incorporated onto 2 sites. So there have to be a number of activities that take place before UHL can make its changes. One of those activities is an increase in prevention and self-care. So a lot of our challenges within the health service and within the social care service is down to sometimes preventable conditions or conditions that could be prevented if you actually saw them and treated them earlier. So 70% of the budgets, particularly in health, go on people with long-term conditions. If you can predict long-term conditions, if you can treat them earlier, if you can keep people safe and keep people out of urgent crisis situations, then potentially you can reduce the demand on the acute sector, but you can also reduce the overall cost, which reduces the sustainability. So there is a big focus on self-care and prevention. But there's also a big focus on care at home. So we have a care model at the moment called Intensive Community Services. And LPT are running intensive community service. They have 126 beds. Now, beds is an odd currency here. It means that you have enough staff to treat 126 individuals during a period of care. That service is quite new, but the evidence so far has shown that it's working and it's well received, and where that has been tried in other parts of the country, it has worked well in order to support people to continue to live in their own home, to stay in their own home, and to stay well. There is evidence that if you keep people in hospital for long periods of time, they actually start to become more ill rather than better, because they lose the ability to look after themselves. So the ICS services is about to try to keep people, where it's possible, you rehabilitate people in their own home so that they keep the facilities and their safety and the normality of their surroundings, and they don't become sort of confused about their environment. The plan over 2 years is to increase the number of ICS beds from 126 to 376, which will significantly increase the ability to rehabilitate people in their own surroundings. And those services will be provided across the county. So they will be provided from centres like we do have now, sort of community nursing centres and hospitals, but they will be provided across the whole of the county. That will allow us to remove some of the rehab beds out of our community hospitals, which will allow us to put into those community hospitals subacute services. So we plan to have 5 subacute wards. Now, subacute wards are wards where you still have intensive care, you are still quite ill, but you don't need the absolute specialist care that you get in an acute hospital. So at the moment, people are treated in an acute bed where they could actually do with subacute care. Subacute care would be better for them. And if we can put in subacute beds, sorry, this keeps moving. If we can put subacute beds in place, then we can take that demand, bed for bed, out of the acute hospital, and we can therefore reduce the load on the acute hospital. So the acute hospital then can focus more on specialist and truly emergency care. To make space for those 5 wards, we have to move rehab out. So we have to replace some of our rehab beds with the beds at home. We also need to look at the clinical safety of our existing estate. So there is NICE guidance and there's CQC guidance that says that you really need 2 wards in any hospital. And so we are looking at going from 8 community sites with inpatient care to 6 community sites with inpatient care, where we will have 2 wards per site with 21 beds each. And that will give us a quality and safe nursing and clinical level of care. Okay. We are going through the process of working out where those sites will be. Okay. We haven't absolutely confirmed it yet, but we are on Monday. We had a session where internally we believe we know where those sites will be. We need to just go through a bit of a standstill while people just sense check, are we comfortable with that? And then we will be able to come back to the HOS and the Health and Wellbeing Boards to say this is what we're planning to do. So overall, we will reduce the number of inpatient hospitals, but we will not reduce the number of inpatient beds. In total, we believe we will increase the number of inpatient beds because we will have the care at home it's a much higher level of care at home. Excuse me. We will not, though, in our present plans, we will not close those sites. Those sites will still be available for planned care, for outpatients, and for other other work that's done through them today. We plan to increase the amount of planned care, so increase the amount of procedures and operations that are done in the community by about 40%, because again that takes some of the demand out of the acute and it allows the acute to only deal with the specialist care and the real true emergency care. Right. I'm going to stop there and allow for questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, anybody wish to ask a question on that so far? Yeah, David.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Very interesting, and I think it's wise from time to time to stand back and look at the services you provide and see if they can be improved. But I live in Countersthorpe, and we have rather a large health centre there, and in my youth I have received treatment there, like I've had stitches and things like that. I'm sure there are a lot of other medical practices throughout the county that could cope with that, because accident and emergency obviously is a key part of the service that's provided. And what is the possibility or the plans to improve such services in the existing health centres throughout the county?
Do Do you want to answer that? Shall I answer? There are a number of plans to increase services in primary care as well as in the community hospitals. So some of the discussions around the planned care treatments, there is conversations about could some of that actually be done in primary care settings and in primary care hubs. And there's a plan to create primary care hubs which will bring specialists together, and they will be large enough to do some larger procedures.
Alan Pearson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just again, for everybody, we discussed it this morning, we had a briefing. I'm really passionate. I think the Better Care Fund is potentially a very good way to go, but as I mentioned this morning, we get better quality if we don't just think about money. So the focus should be, if we focus on the better quality provision of services at the grassroots, then that will, in fact, later on impact on the money we spend, because the service is better. Then we have less acute needs in the hospitals. So again, very, very important that we focus on quality, what we provide, and how we engage with the people.
I think, as discussed this morning, we agree.
Dr. Ryan.
I've got a couple of questions. I'll perhaps give you them both, and then one of them relates to the very interesting and well-informed question from Mrs. Baker about admissions. And I know that this is one of the terms that's been used in some of the documents that we've received is the term avoided admissions, which I've always felt to be a bit of a fudge. Because it's how would you know an admission's been avoided? So that's part of a question. And I'm interested to see on one of the pages further on in the papers we've got today that actual admissions are going up, and that readmissions are either static or up. But length of stay seems to be an important aspect, so I'd be interested in your comments on that, particularly with respect to the work that you're going to be doing with the ICS in the community. That's one question, a bit long. And the other one is about what does a community hospital that's providing subacute beds need in the form of infrastructure? Does it need X-ray facilities? What would stop a certain community hospital actually being suitable for one of your subacute wards?
Okay, if I talk about avoided admissions, what's... And you're right, it's very difficult to... How do you measure something that didn't happen as opposed to something that has happened? So it is a bit of a tricky thing to measure. But what we mean there is there is evidence that if you helped people to stay safe, if you had somebody, particularly with the frail and elderly, if you had somebody that a frail and elderly person could call in a crisis, who would go to them within a very short period of time and say, okay, how are you? What can we do? How can we help you? You could avoid their situation becoming extreme and them ending up in an ambulance going to A&E. So by avoided admissions, what we're talking about is how do you intervene before somebody's condition deteriorates to the point where they actually really do need to be in A&E. And so the crisis response units that we're presently putting in place and have been put in place under the Better Care Fund are aimed to do that. Now, from the evidence I've seen so far, they haven't been as successful as people had hoped, but they have been successful in reducing admissions. So what we need to look at is what more do we need to do in order to make them as successful as we really want them to be, so that we can keep the level of admissions of people who, if you helped them before it got to a really critical point, you could keep them out of hospital. Okay. So length of stay is actually quite important, and and I think it's a bit theoretical at the moment because there isn't enough evidence to say absolutes, but the evidence is coming together. There is a few that ICS beds, ICS care, has a shorter length of stay than if you take somebody into an acute hospital. And the reason being is that a person... Sorry, I'm not sure whether this is me or maybe it's the way I'm speaking into it. The reason being is that the person deteriorates It's all right, don't worry. I might end up shouting. So the reason being that the person's health and ability to look after themselves deteriorates when they are in a situation that is alien to them. Thanks, Rosemary. I could have done that myself. My apologies. And as a result, if you keep them in their own surroundings, you can make sure that their length of stay, in the sense of length of time for which they need care, is shorter. Right? So that's what that means. I would be guessing about. I know I've heard what subacute wards mean. I would be guessing as to absolutes what hospitals need, but I would guess there is diagnostics. I would guess it is access to some specialist clinicians. I would guess that it's access to specialist nursing. Right, so it's not simply someone who is. It's not. It's the rehabilitation services are perhaps more about the nursing services. I think subacutes do actually need some of the diagnostics and the clinical care.
Okay, Mr. Shue.
Thank you. Yeah, you've talked quite a bit about moving care to a more home-based setting. Now, anything like this is obviously a good thing if it works. Okay, so what do you see are the main challenges in terms of managing a group of staff looking after patients in that setting, as opposed to managing them in hospital where everything's under one roof?
I think that the first challenge that we're facing, because we're trying to set up the first set of additional ICS beds now, so we're facing some of those challenges now. And one of the first things you find, of course, is staff being comfortable in that environment as opposed to a sort of the community environment of a hospital. So not all staff feel comfortable with being in that a bit out on your own type setting. So I think that's one of the bits, is making sure that people are confident, about making sure that staff are confident to operate on their own, very much probably in one-to-one care with a patient. I think the second thing I would consider is how do you measure quality? Yeah, so we have a lot of metrics for measuring quality when we have patients within a hospital. You know, we are now, because we have ICS services, there are metrics for measuring quality of those ICS services. We just need to make sure that they are robust as the ways that we measure quality with patients within a hospital. I think the third part is probably about the patient themselves. And some patients will be able to be treated in that way and cared for in that way, and they need to be comfortable with it. And I think that's part of why LPT are keeping the rehab beds as well, because not all patients will necessarily feel comfortable, or their families will feel comfortable with them being treated in a home-based environment. But as you say, it is something that we will grow over 2 years, and over those 2 years we will learn and we will adapt and we will improve it. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, in terms of what you just said, are you talking from experience here, or is this just what you foresee? So I'm not a nurse, so I can't talk from experience. I am speaking from what the people in LPT who run these services have told me. So it's other people's experience then, yeah?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's not pure conjecture, if you will. Dr. Felsen.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, all sounds good on paper. And like a lot of these things, much the same as what we just heard from, the proof is in the pudding, I suppose. What I'm worried about, actually, is timescales. And you mentioned possibly all this happening over the next 4 to 5 years. How confident are you that you'll have it all well underway in those 4 to 5 years?
I think change often happens because something is challenged. Right? I think the economy of Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland, the health and social care economy, is challenged in such a way that we will have to do something over those 4 to 5 years. But we mustn't do it in a way that destabilises the health and social care service. All right? So there is a balance between moving at pace and moving safely. My sense, working with the chief officers of the system, working with people within the system, there is a real appetite for change, and there's a real appetite to make this work. So therefore, I am confident that we will get it started probably in the next 1 to 2 years. Will it all be rosy in 5 years' time? Stuff happens. Events take place. So we can't really predict that. All I think we can do is get it moving and keep moving and learn as we go.
We've had a briefing, so members of the public know, we had a briefing this morning in slightly more detail on this topic. So members are, say, clued up. But we've had numerous briefings over the last 2 years on Better Care Together. It's starting to take a form where people can see what it means to them locally. But I think for me, as the first time as a county councillor full stop, it's the biggest change I've seen and the biggest desire for change I've seen ever in the health service of the city and county. Some of it's a bit scary, to be honest. Moving around the beds while it's all going on is scary, and I think we as a committee are going to have to keep on coming back to it and asking questions and saying, is it working, isn't it working, what's the quality situation, what are the ramifications, to make sure try and make sure it works. The price of failure I wouldn't like to think about, because it's people's lives. So I think it's incumbent on us all to make sure that is pushed forward. So we'll take it from there, unless there's any other comments or questions anybody wants to add. Sorry, Mr. Kaufman. And then we'll move on. But first, Jeffrey, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Chair, it's your last comments that I think came home to me, because I remember was it 79, 80, care in the community? It became known around my part of the world as dumping in the community. It was brought on as I don't think people thought of it as an improvement, although it was mainly brought on as a cost-saving measure. Now, the idea of getting, in those days, people out of institutions and living as they are now was absolutely right, but the philosophy behind it, the main philosophy, was the saving of money. And that goes back to the government of that time, and that was their philosophy. So I support your comments, Chair. What we as a committee must do is to make sure these things are really working, because I'm sure a lot of us in the room have been at 9 o'clock at night on a weekend with a desperately ill relative. You've given a phone number and it doesn't ring, or nobody answers it, or they say phone back in half an hour, and are left in an absolute impossible situation. And I think what we've got to do as part of this is to make sure your plans work and that people are not in that situation in the future. I realise changes have to be made, and I realise things that we treasured are no longer the right way of doing things, but we've really got a job on our hands to make sure that we're behind you helping this work. Jeff.
Alan, you want to come back?
Okay, sorry about that. Just in response to Mr. Cuffman, the issues have changed a little bit, and I think for the general public here today, there's a bit of a tsunami. I'm sure you're aware. The figures that we've got is that over 60s now we're over 30% of the population. We're an ageing population, and unless we've all got massive pensions and we're all rich, we've got to find money somewhere to care for people. And the present structure, we're aware, is not working. And if we don't do something now, your children, your grandchildren, will struggle. So we have to do something. And in a number of models that I've seen, I've worked in care for a long, long time, on and off. I'm sure most people here, do we all want to be at home? And I'd rather die at home than be in a hospital. Do we all agree with that? I want to be with my family. I want to have things that I recognise around me. I want things. That's what I want. I want care. I want to make sure that I live as long as possible, but I want things around me. And we need to try as much as possible to make that happen. And I believe, I know it's a bit risky, we get a bit scared, but I do honestly believe this is the way forward. Our job is to make sure that it goes along as safely as possible, and we do our job as much as possible. The intent is very good. We just don't make sure we get there as soon as possible and safely. Okay.
I agree. Dr. Ryan, you want to come back?
I thought I wanted to pick up on the point, well-made point by Mr. Kaufman about is it going to be dumping in the community or care in the community? Because I think there is that balance between the vision that Alan Pearson is putting forward very eloquently, that most people actually do wish to die at home, but we don't want to be dumped into the community. And I do feel that it's perhaps not something that you three can answer because you're from the NHS, but I would see that the people that this committee also needs to be bringing here are the providers of social care, because however good your ICS is and however good your beds are, if someone is living alone, in my other capacity as a GP, I have never seen anyone successfully taken through to end of life who lives alone. Can't be done.
I think that's a fair comment, but I think that's why there's a suggestion of a mix of the way of doing it. And there's still the need for people to have their end of life in environments that are safe and of good quality. And I think that's the most important thing, because we all live, all of us live in the aftermath of Mid-Staffordshire, and the ramifications that's had on the health service and the health provision is absolutely massive in terms of the number of nurses, the standards, and that's been quite fundamental in the way things have gone. So we'll move on to Appendix 2, which is the Hinckley Community Hospitals, which is East CCG's thing.
It's West.
Oh, it's West, sorry. I'm going around the twist. It's been a long day. West.
Can we ask Caroline,
Yeah,
our colleague Caroline Trevithick to talk about Hinckley?
Please do.
Okay. Apologies, Chair, that I've only just come to the table. In terms of the future direction for Hinckley, the West CCG is in the process of working with the population of Hinckley and local stakeholders, including district councillors, local MPs and the GPs and staff who work in Hinckley hospitals, to look at pulling together options in terms of what can be provided for planned care and urgent care for Hinckley, to ensure that we've got an offer that meets the needs of the population going into the future. So we're at the position now where we've spent the last 18 months hearing insights from patients and people who use services in Hinckley, and marrying that up against the future needs of the population of Hinckley, including the increased numbers of people that are going to live locally, as well as obviously the increasing elderly population. We're looking at that also in terms of the Better Care Together plans, where there's the plans to move activity, particularly planned care activity, out of University Hospitals of Leicester, to ensure that we've got the right facilities to be able to provide all of these services. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll be at the position where we're meeting again with the public, and we've got an event on the 5th of October to co-design what those options are going to be, and so it's very difficult for me to say at this moment in time what those options are, because we want to ensure that we're doing that with the local population. Those plans will be taken forward in terms of the plans that Mary's put together for the Better Care Together consultation process. So it's really ensuring that we've got planned care and urgent care services meeting the needs of the population, and that we've got buildings that are fit for purpose to be able to deliver those services going forward.
Okay, any questions, comments from the committee? I do note that you just say you'll be rationalising services delivered at one of the hospital sites. I presume this is part of the changes that have already been referred to.
The changes that Mary was talking about related to inpatient beds, so to wards. Hinckley District Hospital doesn't have wards, it's only got planned care services. So what we need to look at is whether or not we're able to deliver those services from that setting, or whether we need to do it from alternative settings.
Okay, well, I think there's another one we'll come back to as it progresses, and just keep an eye on as we do with a number of items. But thank you for the update. It's we will await to see what happens next, as it were. So thank you for that. then finally on this one, we'll now talk about East, sorry, and the community services strategy there.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best to be succinct and brief. So in East Leicestershire and Rutland CCG, we developed an integrated community services strategy as part of our integrated plan for 2014-16. And over the last few months, we've been engaging widely with our stakeholder colleagues, both in primary care, in local authorities, with our Health Watch colleagues, to develop a model for the delivery of services underneath that. That model is intended to both inform and respond to the changes in Better Care Together. And I think if I try not to repeat what Mary has said, but to refer specifically to East, it looks very closely at the needs of our population, which in the context of an ageing population, both nationally and locally, is already an aged population and will grow significantly over the next few years. And as a member quite rightly said, over the next 10 years, we will see our aged population escalating to over 30%. So a very significant challenge in the East, in the broader context of Leicestershire, and also the model of delivering those services when we have we have about 30% of the population, but 50% of the geography. Means we are looking very much at how those services are delivered to deliver the outcomes we require for our patients. The model that has been published now and is available on our website for engagement for those areas on which we engage describes 3 very clear levels of services. It describes level 1 services, which is services that will be delivered in community settings, very much built around hubs, a term that we've heard used today, around GP practices, and we'll be providing more of those services that our member asked questions about, from Councillor Thorpe asked questions about earlier. Level 2 will be very much about rehabilitation, reablement services, move of some services from ward bed-based services to home bed-based services, and will ensure that we actually help our population to get better sooner and to live their longer lives better than had we not made these interventions. And then level 3 relates to the subacute services, as Mary described very clearly in the shifting of beds. Around that, we're also delivering a range of therapy services and outpatient services. What this does mean is we need to look at how we use our estate effectively, and whilst we are engaging on the overall model and the specific levels of services that we'll be delivering in the future, where consultation is required, that will be undertaken as part of Better Care Together. I'm happy to take any questions.
Ryan.
I'm going to refer back to the previous paper, which we didn't comment on, which is where it says that 54% of the patients at Hinckley and Bosworth Hospital were identified as fit for discharge in a 2013 review, but awaiting a place in either residential nursing home or for a health or social care package. On your paper, which is on page 39 in this pack, you do seem to have addressed an issue that personally I feel is absolutely key to making all of this work, which is sorting out social care. And you said that there is a possibility to include social care provision in agreement with the local authority partners. I was wondering if you could explain how you envisage that working.
Okay, I think where we're most advanced on that is with the services in Rutland. And whilst obviously that may not be pertinent to members at the table today, it's maybe worth looking at as an example. So when we look at the options for delivering services in the future, one of the things our patients have told us, we hear very often that the patients see various healthcare professionals and have to repeat their experience. Our patients were very clear that they experience that with social care services as well, and not just between one social care service and another, but between health and social care. So they've been very, very clear that they wish to see much more joining up between health and social care. Also, the model is built more around a wellness model than around an illness model, and a significant focus on prevention. So working more closely with social care partners is quite key. And the model in Rutland looks at making the part of the offer an offer where social care and healthcare work together in a much more integrated fashion and have some co-located services. In the East, we do have a model of, I think we call it proactive care in the West, we call it integrated care in the East, that is particularly shaped around the needs of our specific, not so much the population, but a model that works in the way that responds to how our patients are located and ensures that we don't actually reinforce the issues that we have of rural deprivation with isolated communities. So it means that we have social care staff and we have nursing staff working together with GP practices to identify the holistic needs of the patients as opposed to the healthcare needs separate from the social care needs.
I'm wondering how that model would help with the problem of ensuring that people who don't need to be in a community hospital are actually at home, and those people who would like to be at home, to die at home, don't end up getting admitted due to what is often a lack of social care.
I think, although I think we've articulated in the paper clearly our ambitions and some of our early learnings, I think it's very clear from the discussion that we've had around the table today that there is still a lot to be done to move that further forward. So it's something that will be constant learning. I think the progress that we've made to date has been underpinned by the specific model of integrated care that we've got, that joins up levels of healthcare and levels of social care. I think a real challenge moving forward will be looking at the assessment of patients, ensuring they are placed in the right place, and ensuring that we don't undermine any services by actually shifting from one form of service to another too quickly. I think Rutland is possibly the most extreme example of that. We know that for East Leicestershire particularly, our call on continuing healthcare funding is the highest in the country. The balance between health and social care is something that we would rightly expect to be challenged as we move further forward, and we can only do that through working together. The Rutland example is perhaps the most extreme example that we have across East Leicestershire and Rutland, and the way we're addressing that is by different roles, both with social care and nursing, so that we can actually have people who are experts for our population, and that we make sure that we spend our healthcare pound wisely so that we actually deliver the optimal services to the patients that need it.
I presume that ties in with the County Council's new sort of model of locality working, so that the idea being, certainly in social care, I can think of one other department, it doesn't work like that, but social care is based around the locality, and then the people working there will know the sort of local whys and wherefores, if you like, which you can't always get, but that works. Social care going that way, and the County Council's operating in that way. I'm assuming if you do a similar thing through GPs, it's getting the wraparound, really, isn't it? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying not to let anybody fall through the cracks.
We do, absolutely, with the wraparound services. I think one thing in East Leicestershire, we do have districts that are quite widely dispersed. So we have our hubs. We may have two hubs to one district as opposed to one hub to one district. And there is ongoing work with the local authority to look at exactly how we locate some of those services more locally. And there's much more opportunity to do that now than we have had previously with Better Care Together.
Anyone else? Kevin?
A little bit of like a question I asked before, actually. You mentioned you have a timetable of this, really, 2014 to 2016. We're halfway through that now. 2016 is only a few... isn't very far away, I'm afraid. Christmas is coming, isn't it? How confident, again, are you that how much of this will be in place? Bearing in mind, you still haven't finalised the community hospitals in East Leicestershire and Rutland. I mean, particularly in Market Harbour. I know we've got a paper on that today, but we're years away, if not months away. I just feel a little bit nervous about the fact that you're putting timescales on it when there are so many open-ended sides to it, really.
Okay, absolutely, and perhaps for clarity, the integrated strategy 2014-16 was part of the requirement to publish a plan for 2 years. looking at the content of that, it absolutely doesn't stop at 2016. It lays the foundation for the work that's moving forward. In the same way, the community services model, we have an implementation plan. So there are some things that are in that that are part of what we are doing all of the time in terms of improving our services, and they will happen quite quickly. But there are some, really, really big changes that will depend on changes to hospitals. Across East Leicestershire and Rutland, we are absolutely not planning to remove any beds. But in order to ensure safety and to be able to care for a higher acuity of patients in the most appropriate way, and also to be sure that we get the maximum benefit out of the ICS beds, we anticipate there being a very different model of a bedded base in the future, and that is what we will be going out to consultation on.
Well, seeing as you raised Harbour, Kevin, we'll...
I'm waiting for it. Says in here, it will be presented to the committee today.
Yes, the Harbour District Council Committee as well, apparently. Tomorrow. Yes. Can we just deal with that while we're just going through it, please, Andy?
Yes, fine. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of brief points then by way of update for the project for the new development at St Luke's site in Market Harborough. Firstly, we have now concluded the discussions around the legal basis of the occupation. Effectively, that means we've agreed wording with the CCG for the legal indemnity that we needed to make sure, effectively, that all the costs for the project and the running costs moving forward are met by the tenants and the commissioners, and thereby protect the viability of the building moving forward. This will also allow us to move forward and conclude lease arrangements with our prospective tenants. Secondly, having completed this now allows us to move forward with the contractor, our preferred contractor, Morgan Sindall. We've met with them recently, and we anticipate we will be instructing them by the end of this week to move forward with the next phase of the work, which is the 12 weeks pre-construction activities. And based on being able to do that, which we will do, Morgan Sindalls have issued a programme start date for works to begin on site on the 30th of November this year. Thank you.
Well, this meeting has been recorded, so I'll hold you to that. I wasn't grey before this started. I wasn't even a councillor before that started. Enough said, I think. Is there anything else on this item, or shall we move on, committee? Yep, Jeffrey, sorry.
I just wondered, in the conversations we're here, I think we're continually making the point that we're worried. The buildings, the changes will happen. I think the question I want to know is, what is your plan B? And when will you know that the buildings and the changes have happened, but the other bit hasn't happened? And you must have a plan B.
For Harborough or for the whole overarching?
Well, the overarching.
I think we, if I'm being honest, I think we know we have no specific plan B for Better Care Together. No, because we realise we have to make change. And going back to the question that was asked earlier, you've got a situation where the health and social care situation in this country is in an unprecedented position, and unprecedented positions tend to drive change. So we know something has to happen. We can't just sit with our heads in the sand. But do we have plan Bs for the various different parts? Yes, of course we do. You know, we have. It is it's a myriad of moving parts at times. You know, if we can't do this, we'll try to do that. So I would say that there are a number of plans B, C, and D if we find that we get stuck along the way. But they're not an overarching plan B in the sense that we're just going to go, OK, we'll chuck this up in the air and start again. Because where do we go if we start again? We will be back doing what we're trying to do now. No.
Yeah, you're not in a situation, because you're not like starting a business where there's no customers, where you can say, well, we'll try this or we'll try this. You know, in a sense, failure is not an option, which I'm sure somebody else said somewhere. But essentially, that is the case. You're treating people every day, and we want to treat people better every day, more efficiently, and let's base it at home. I mean, our family members who've been into hospital, and it generally doesn't do you any good if you've got a long-term condition. And I think that's a sad fact that we have to bear in mind, that I think what is intended is the right thing. I think one of the things we need to do is make sure that it works. And I'm sure everybody on the other side of the table wants it to work too. So we'll finish with item 8 and move on to item... I'm sorry, no. The way the committees are run sits within the council constitution, and we can't turn it into a debating shop with everybody present. We have a structure, and we unfortunately have to stick to that. I'm sorry, but no, the right to reply is, as I misinformed somebody. I think it was yourself. No, it's okay. We clear constitution. The right to reply actually applies only at full council. I've discovered later, not at our scrutiny committees. So we can't do that. I'm sorry. That's the structure we have to work within. I'm now going to take items 9 and 10 together, as they both relate to the same issue. And I've got Caroline Trevithick from West Leicestershire and Jude Smith, as well as Toby Sanders and Nick Wilmot from the West. After they've introduced the item, I'll ask Barbara Neal can make a statement on behalf of the Ashby Civic Society. I'll also draw members' attention to the additional information pack that you've received, which includes an appendix to the report from West Leicestershire, representations from Joe Coxon, local member, representation from the chairman of Ashby Civic Society, a letter from the vice chairman of Ashby Civic Society, a response from West Leicestershire to one of those letters, a question from Mr John White, a letter from Ashby de la Zouch Town Council, representation from Betty Voss, an extract of the minutes of the extract from the minutes of the meeting where we previously considered this item. There's a lot there, and I will ask you to take it as read rather than have me go through it all and read them all out. We've had a reasonable amount of time to go through it, and I would hope everybody has had a chance to go through it all. So who is going to start off as Toby? Would you please present the item?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. My name's Toby Sanders. I'm the Managing Director of West Leicestershire Clinical Commissioning Group. That's the body that's responsible for planning and funding healthcare for all 366,000 patients in West Leicestershire. I'm the Chief Officer, so I'm ultimately accountable alongside my board colleagues for every decision that we take. I'm also the Chair of the Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland Urgent Care Board, which is the body that looks at planning emergency and urgent services across Leicester City, Leicestershire County and Rutland, and brings together local authorities, brings together health colleagues and partners and emergency services like EMAS. And I'm also the joint lead officer for the Better Care Together programme alongside Leicester Hospital's Chief Executive, John Adler, which we've just been hearing about a few moments ago. The reason for sharing that in terms of context is I think it's relevant to some of the conversation we're going to have about how Ashby Hospital fits into our wider plans in terms of health and care. I'd just like, if I may, Chair, to ask my colleagues to briefly introduce themselves, because I think in terms of their experience and background, given some of the conversations we've just been having, it might be helpful as well.
Yeah, please, carry on.
Good afternoon, I'm Caroline Trevithick. I'm the Chief Nurse and Quality Lead for West Leicestershire CCG, and I have been the Senior Responsible Officer for the Ashby project. I'm also the registered nurse on the board of the CCG, so hold that responsibility as well.
Good afternoon, I'm Jude Smith. I'm Head of Nursing and Deputy Clinical Director for Community Health Services for Leicester Partnership Trust, so my responsibility is for the nursing and the standards of the services we deliver.
Good afternoon. My name's Dr. Nick Wilmot. I'm a GP in Hinckley, board member for West Leicestershire CCG. I was GP clinical lead for the Ashby Community Services review. Thank you.
Thank you, team. I wanted to do that up front because I think it's important to see the range of different experience and skills we've got in front of you today in terms of some of the discussion we're going to get into. I will assume that people can hear me okay at the back. If you can't, please wave. I will try and slow down a little bit as I'm talking as well. I have a tendency to speed up. Firstly, thank you for giving us the opportunity to come back and update members of the committee around the discussions that we last had with you in March last year. I think it was March 2014 that we came and talked to you about what at that point in time were the proposals that we had set down for the future of community services in Ashby. Since that time, clearly we've made a lot of progress and moved a good way. We have concluded and completed the consultation work that we did last year. That was very extensive in terms of discussing with the local public, with local patients, with other interest groups, the proposals that we were putting forward. We've continued since we took decisions as both Leicester Partnership Trust Board and our CCG board to have ongoing discussions, particularly with the Ashby Civic Society and with the Town Council. And we've continued to receive feedback both about the consultation process itself, but also in terms of responses to petitions and other things that have been generated locally. And again, the reason for outlining that is that I think the purpose of today's session from our perspective is to update the committee on the progress we're now making in terms of implementing the decisions we've taken. But I did want to take a few moments just to remind ourselves of the process we went through to get to that stage. The first thing that's worth noting is that public consultations are not a referendum. That's not to say that our organisation and board does not take the feedback through consultations extremely seriously. We do and have done and have repeatedly listened and have repeatedly revisited as a full board the feedback that we've received from different parts of the local area. But ultimately, the commissioning board has a responsibility to look at how we make sure we get the best outcomes in terms of health for the local population, how we meet the future needs of the population which are changing, and how we balance that with the resources available to us as an organisation. Now, our starting point in all of these discussions around Ashby has really been two things. Firstly, how do we respond to the changing health need of our population? And we've heard a little bit today already from Mary about the ageing population that we have across our area, about changes in terms of long-term conditions, and about the needs and demands that that places on the health and social care system. And that really does create a very clear requirement for health and care services across the Ashby area to change and move forward. And we took that as our starting point. But the second thing we put alongside that was how we look at future service models and the evidence base and the evidence of what works and delivers better outcomes for patients in the long term. And that's very much where the development around integrated community services, around supporting patients in their own home and in alternative settings, but also crucially making sure that when patients are ill and do require inpatient facilities, and they will and they do, that those facilities exist and are in the right place and can be accessed when people need it most. So that really was the driver of why we undertook the exercise that we did. The consultation process, we've set that in with the paperwork, and Chair, I don't intend to talk you through and remind everyone of the various steps we worked through with that. We might have some of that discussion. There's just three final things I wanted to raise before asking colleagues to comment on, I think, bringing to life some of how services have changed and are different now rather than at some future point that we might be describing. And that's to say that there are, I think, three areas that both the commissioning group and Leicester Partnership Trust, and actually this committee, when you previously had us with you in front of you in March last year, all raised as areas that you wanted us to keep coming back to as we went through the implementation phase. The first of those was making sure that strategically what we were doing in Ashby made sense in the context of what was happening across the whole of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, to make sure that what felt like we were going a bit earlier in Ashby compared to some of the other parts of the county, that what we were doing was still well lined strategically with that direction. And I think what we've heard today from the Better Care Together programme absolutely supports the view that that is the case. The second thing, and this is really important in terms of the kind of checks and balances as we've gone through our implementation phase, has been making sure that we had alternative services that existed and were tested before we made changes to either move services or withdraw services into other settings. And we've done that in relation to the inpatient services, for example, which closed last October, where we made sure that we'd reviewed the availability of beds in other community hospital settings in this local area to make sure that where patients did need access to those beds, that capacity was there and could be used. And our board and Leicester Partnership Trust Board were not prepared to make those final steps last October unless they'd been satisfied that was the case. And I certainly wouldn't want, as the chair of our urgent care board, to have gone into a winter not confident that we had enough bed capacity in community services for West Leicestershire patients. So we made sure that those alternatives were there and they did exist. We made sure that the intensive community services had been invested in and were up and running and were supporting patients in that area. we've had feedback as we've gone through this process from the Civic Society and others that we don't always get that right, and that sometimes for certain patients those services don't work in the way that they would want or we would want. But in the round, looking at those services, we were satisfied that we had the new services in place, up and running, that crucially made it safe for us to make those changes. And the final thing to say in terms of the 3 checks and balances around the implementation of these changes is that we have not moved services and won't move services or make final decisions around releasing the building that I think is still on the screen behind me until we have alternative premises in place for all of the services that have been worked through here. And that in particular includes some of the remaining outpatient services in the area and also some of the community teams that have been based in this facility. And that's very much the position that we're in at the moment, where we're continuing to have discussions with the local council around Hood Park and the development of that site, and also where we're really looking forward to and excited about the Ashby Health Centre, which is due to open towards the end of this year, and the opportunity that gives us around providing extra outpatient services in that area. If I may, Chair, I'd just briefly like to turn to a couple of colleagues to ask them to do 2 things. Firstly, I'd just like to ask Dr. Nick Wilmot to just explain to the committee really the perspective from the clinical leads within the board and the board GPs, as we've, I think particularly Nick, come back to this issue a number of times. I don't want the committee to feel we took a decision early last year and that was the last we've reflected on this.
Thanks, Toby. Yes, as a GP who's been in Hinckley for a large number of years, I know how passionately my patients feel about their local community hospitals and how difficult a decision this was for the GP board members, West Leicestershire CCG, to take a decision that ultimately would close a community hospital. But I think it's been set out well earlier in terms of why we're trying to provide more care for more frail elderly patients in their own homes and how there is an absolute imperative to do so. Still realising that we do need to provide some community beds across West Leicestershire. And Jude, I know, will be talking about how we've made that assurance in terms of ensuring that we do have sufficient numbers. But it hasn't been an easy decision, but it's one, as GPs, we are absolutely sure is in the best interest of as many of our elderly frail patients as possible, who have told us that the place they want to be, particularly when it comes to end of life, is in their own homes. And we do need to support these patients wherever possible, as they so wish to be in their own homes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. And I'd just like to ask Jude just to say a few words about where we are with some of the community services, and particularly community nursing services in the local area. Again, just to give the committee a sense of how those have moved on and changed and expanded during the time that we've been working through this implementation.
Thank you, Toby. Just with regards to ICS, which was started in 2012, 2013, because I set it up as part of the team, as Dr. Enyon knows. And we've looked at the validation of the study that we had. We carried out on it through the University of Leicester, and the evidence from patients and staff and users for the ICS was in favour of ICS. And interestingly, it showed a 25% reduction less to community hospitals because people were being admitted directly to ICS. And in terms of the key performance indicators and the quality measures, they were as robust and are as robust as our community hospital measures. So we have confidence in our ICS service, and also going forward with the Better Care Together, because it's a model that has now been established for over 2 years. We have evidence behind it, and we can scale it up in order to meet the Better Care Together requirements, and we are currently in the implementation phase of doing that. I think some of our exciting new services that we've just recently set up, in line, as Toby said, is our enhanced night nursing service. And that's provided that night nursing element for patients who do want to stay at home. And the majority, 54% of the patients who have received the night nursing service have been those who've been in their last days of life, who've suddenly gone into crisis, where we've not been able to activate other social care providers to care for them. So we put a night nurse in all night, and those patients have then been allowed to die with peace and dignity in their own home. And interestingly, Some of them have been patients living on their own who didn't want to go in, who've lost members of their family and wanted to stay at home. So I think we've had some successful stories from that, and they continue to come in. And I guess for me, latterly, which is really exciting, well, they're all exciting for me, but one of the ones which I find most exciting is our older persons assessment unit, which was commissioned through the West for us to set up, and it's held at Loughborough Hospital, and that's an access point for GPs across the county and the city to use, rather than admit patients to the acute sector for a geriatric and an advanced nurse practitioner assessment. We've been evaluating that. 97% of patients who've come through the older persons unit have been evidenced as being an avoided admission, and we've been using robust analyses that you would apply to measures to determine the predictability of the patient being admitted to hospital. So 97% are avoided admissions, because it's a really difficult thing to say what is an avoided admission. So in terms of the services that we've been providing in the community, the ICS rolls out and continues to grow. The enhanced nursing service has enhanced it, and the older persons unit kind of completes the circle now.
Thank you, Jude. And very finally, Caroline, could you perhaps just give us a word around where we are with the outpatient services in relation to Ashby?
Thank you, Toby. In terms of consultant-led outpatient services, we've moved those to Colville Hospital, and one of the benefits for patients there is they no longer have to trek to Colville to have their x-ray and then go back to Ashby to see their consultant. So it's reduced the amount of journeys for patients, even though we've had to move it obviously 9 miles down the road. In terms of the remaining nurse-led and therapy-led services, they're still in the hospital and they're still providing the same level of service. And as Toby said, we're not changing any of those services until we've got the next location for them to go. And the Partnership Trust are working really closely with the District Council to ensure that Hood Park Leisure Centre can offer more of a health and wellbeing approach to care, in terms of ensuring that people have got access to therapies and exercise. And it really does join up in our prevention agenda. So I think that's quite exciting for us going forward as well.
Thank you. So in summary, this hasn't been an easy journey for us or for the local area in working through the right models for the future. And as Dr. Wilmot has rightly said, these aren't decisions that we or the board have taken lightly. We fully understand how strongly and passionately people feel about local facilities and local services, and in particular how we relate to and connect to local buildings, particularly those that have been in use and service for a long time. Our responsibility is to make sure we have the right services available for local patients and local populations, and we're confident that the changes we put in place and are already implementing take us in that direction for Ashby. So, thank you, Chair.
Okay, that was of interest, obviously. I'm going to ask Barbara Neal now to make a statement on behalf of Ashby Civic Society. It is our sort of, what's the phrase, our rules here that you get 5 minutes to give your presentation, and I'll give you a warning when you've got 30 seconds to go, so you know when you're reaching the end. So
I assume I can do my introductions in the same vogue as the LPTCCG presentation.
If we're brief, yes.
That's okay. Right, thank you everybody. My name is Dr. Barbara Neal. I'm a member of the medical profession, and I've worked as a general practitioner and a consultant occupational health physician. Can I just say here that our team are the residents of Ashby, and what we want for Ashby is not as many patients as possible. Sorry. We don't want as many patients as possible to have the right care. We want all the patients to have the right care. And when we're talking about lives, as many as possible is not good enough. Sorry. So, following direction from Jeremy Hunt, I'm speaking on behalf of the Civic Society about the proposed closure of Ashby District Hospital. Can the County Council... Oh, third one. Like gathering them all. Do you like me to do a song? Choose. Can the County Council, who ultimately have to pick up the pieces, afford to ignore the consequences of this plan? Can you hear me? Keep it lower. All right. Come back. Do your duty. Hurrah. a gremlin.
But could I ask people to sort of be quiet while people are speaking, because it is courtesy, and she's got. I'll add extra time, but it doesn't help. Thank you.
So what slide are we on? Right. So ultimately, it's the county council who will pick up the pieces, and we cannot. And can you afford to ignore the consequences of this plan? Do your duty and exert your power to stop this misguided community health strategy, which in our view is not in the best interests of the Ashby District Health Services. Refer this matter to the full Council and the Secretary of State for Health for review. In our view, this proposal is not evidence-based. There's been no proper consultation and engagement. The hospital is fit for purpose, and there is no long-term planning. It will ultimately put patient care and safety at risk and seems to have a complete disregard for the elderly population. We have no confidence in the LPT and the CCG. This closure decision is being justified on the use of alternative community health services, but there is no proof that virtual wards or better care together reduce hospital admissions or costs. This is backed up by local and national targets. This strategy is labour intensive, and there's a crisis in staff recruitment in community nursing and private care sector, which is only going to get worse. We believe that there is no clinical evidence base to justify the closure. Ashby Hospital has been assessed as fit for purpose by the Hospital Inspectorate. How can this be ignored? It has not been assessed as Category D as per Department of Health guidance. It is compliant with fire, health and safety regulations. We believe the list of work has been overestimated. We accept there are some necessary works, but this would make the hospital viable for at least 5 years, during which time a proper evaluation could be carried out by a multidisciplinary group. We believe with minimal investment, Ashby Hospital could provide quality health services for the future. We've been trying to engage with the LPT and CCG in order to understand the rationale for this strategy. To date, this has been unsuccessful. Both organisations have ignored our views and ideas, simply stating, as they have today, that the decision is made and there's nothing we can do about it. We find this rather arrogant and undemocratic standpoint disappointing, if not a gross disregard for their duty to be transparent to the public, who, of course, fund their organisations and jobs. Colloquially put, they are leading us a merry dance. We believe the views of the Ashby people have been ignored. To date, we have not seen a viable, long-term, financially sustainable plan. Closing the hospital is contrary to the views of the Chief Executive NHS England. We have no state-of-the-art facilities promised, and the inpatient beds are unnecessarily empty, with what can only be described as gross disregard for the health needs of the population. We believe there is no valid business plan to justify the closure of the hospital. There's a duty of care to provide equal access to health care. In our view, this policy is both directly discriminatory, given the geographical locations of alternatives, an hour and 10 minutes on a bus to Loughborough, £50 in a taxi, and indirectly discriminatory, as this policy will target the more elderly and frail in our region. A rethink is needed. While we commend any strategy to help people remain in their home, we believe there will always be a local demand for inpatient care. We believe that the strategy is age discriminatory. The CCG acknowledge the risk associated with this community health strategy, and in their risk register, done by the Quality Assurance Framework Board, there is a high likelihood of catastrophic impact due to name but two, a failure to ensure local health economy financial viability over the next 5 years, and safe staffing concerns over community health services. Here is a list of failures to produce that was promised to you at the previous meeting. I do not need to explain them, you can read them yourselves. Like other regions of the UK, delayed transfer of care in the local acute trust continues to have an impact on the ability of A&E to cope with demands. And closing local community hospitals can only make the situation worse. All that has been achieved with the closure of Ashby beds last winter is an increase of patients awaiting home care packages. We estimate 5,840 bed days a year have been lost by the closure of the hospital. We have grave concerns about the decisions and ability of the LPT and CCG to manage this situation. Their plans appear to be short-term. They lack objective concrete data, and there is an absence of a contingency plan, as we've heard before, or plan B, in case of difficulties.
Your 30 seconds.
In addition, our local acute trust is expressing concerns over their ability to cope next winter, given the reduction in community capacity. Only 2 weeks ago, this was expressed. Finally, the final responsibility lies with the County Council in case of disaster. We request your direct involvement. We have no confidence in the procedure to date and have serious reservations about the manner in which decisions to move this strategy forward have been made. Finally, remember the words of Robert Francis QC after the Mid-Staffordshire Public Inquiry: people must always come before numbers. Thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry for the quickness.
I must congratulate you on the amount you managed to put into 5 minutes. So. I'll open it to the committee for comments, questions. We are asked to consider a referral. Now, the process here is that we would refer it to full council, who would then refer the matter to the Secretary of State. I have been reminded, because I frankly didn't know offhand, what the legal bits say about on what grounds we can make a referral. And apparently there's two that apply in this case. The consultation has been inadequate in relation to the content or the amount of time allowed, and the proposal not be in the interest of the health service of the local authority area. So be mindful of that, I think. So who wants to kick off? Sean.
Chair. Toby, I think it was you that said you have made sure that alternative services and community services exist and have been tested. I think that's what you said. Can you tell me how you approached those questions first?
Oh, no, here we go. I'm on. Here we go. When you say how we approach the questions, you mean the question of satisfying ourselves whether other services...
Yeah, I mean, did you approach it objectively? Did you approach it with an open mind? What questions did you ask yourself?
We approached it completely objectively. The role of our board is to satisfy itself or not as to whether other services that have been put in place are working. And ultimately, whilst the previous speaker is correct that obviously the County Council has a role in relation to scrutiny and oversight, accountability and personal accountability in my post sits with me for the decisions we take as a board. So there is absolutely no way that the 10 GPs, that the nursing staff, that the specialist staff who sit around our board and the lay members would have wanted us to take decisions that they felt were unsafe because they weren't satisfied that alternative services existed. So, for example, in relation to the inpatient bed activity, our board asked to see numbers and data about the use of services elsewhere, about how many patients from the Ashby area were using and getting access to other community hospital beds when they needed it, and critically whether there had been occasions when patients needed access to inpatient beds and couldn't get that for any reason. Those were the sorts of tests that our board applied to that and asked Caroline and the team who've been working on this to provide that information.
So, okay, you've given some indication of your lines of inquiry. In terms of the numbers then, what were your findings?
Okay, in terms of numbers, we identified that the additional services that we'd put in place, the intensive community support service, the additional beds that we'd put in there, and the virtual ward beds and the night nursing service had capacity. So they weren't full, so they did have capacity to take patients. And as Toby said, we found that we didn't have patients that didn't get the care. Subsequently, we've also looked at where patients from Ashby have gone to in terms of where the pattern of admissions into other hospitals has happened with the lack of any beds in Ashby. And the pattern is very, very similar to a year ago. The fact that they had access to beds when they needed them, and those beds were accessed either in Colville or Hinckley or even Market Harborough because of the policy of the admissions to the hospital beds. So we haven't seen any change in that.
Excuse me, could I ask people to be courteous and be quiet? that because, the speakers are trying to make a point. If you cannot be quiet, I'll have to ask you to leave. I'm sorry. That's the we want to have a polite meeting, and I don't think barracking helps. Thank you.
Chair, I don't know if, well, when I asked about, and this was part of what you said, whether services have been tested, I presume that you were looking to see that they deliver the quality as well as the pure quantity. So how did you approach that aspect of it?
I'll hand over to Jude a minute in terms of the intensive community support beds. But as Jude said earlier, those beds weren't new. They were started in 2012. So we knew that the quality of services happening, being provided by the district nurses, was of a good quality. So in terms of looking at indicators as markers of good quality, we use the same that we use in any other area of care that we provide. So we're looking at patient experience feedback. That's a really good indication. Carer feedback, incidents, things such as pressure ulcers, any pressure ulcers that are happening in those care settings, any incidents such as falls. So we'd also be looking at the more formal complaints and anything that's coming through that more structured process. So in addition to looking at that from a data perspective, we go out and test it. So we go out and we talk to them for ourselves. We don't take the data on face value. We regularly go out and visit nursing teams to talk to the nursing staff about what's it like to deliver care in those environments, and then talk to the patients ourselves to get those feedback.
I'm finished with that line of inquiry. One further question, though, this is for anybody that cares to answer it, is what is the downside of taking this via council to the Secretary of State? I mean, in terms of the time it might take for a decision, what have we got to lose by doing that?
Well, I know from previous attempts, the Secretary of State just turns around and says, I'm not bothered. To be crude, because that's how it's happened in the past. Referrals have been made and the Secretary of State has said, I'm happy with the decision. So you spend all that time going through the process and you're no further forward. So that is a downside of it. I said it is even if we manage to get full council to agree to a referral, and the Secretary of State then accepts it, the Secretary of State is well within his rights to say, I see no grounds to make any change, and nothing has changed. I don't believe you're allowed to do that, are you? Yeah, you would not be allowed to put your case directly to him. It would have to be done through the council. So you couldn't go and meet him like today and have a discussion. It would all be done. You'd have to do something written. So
okay,
let's maybe clear about that.
So let's say we were to do that. The Secretary of State then decided in her wisdom that it was not the right thing to do. So can we have an idea how much time that would cost and also what that would do to services locally?
If you remember the Safe and Sustainable, the Congenital Children's Heart Review that was referred by at least 2 health scrutinies, and that participated review that lasted 2 years, I think, and he's still ongoing and he's coming to the end now. So that had a massive cost in terms of time and the hospital didn't know what was happening. That was a major one, but it can be a substantial time delay. Alan, you were next.
Yeah, okay. I think the main problem is the consultation process, and I think one of the issues for me is for everybody concerned is we can see you've got a view of consultation. It's not easy. You feel you're engaging, and from today's turnout, I don't think we've hit the nail on the head in the sense of the engagement that you thought you've had. And there is some concerns, and I'd like to thank the Civic Society for the report you've sent, because it gives you both sides of the picture. So first of all, there were only 2 public meetings. Is that correct? How many public meetings were they? Can I just get a feel for what you did?
Can I take you to page 49 in the appendix, which this is the independent report that we had into our engagement process, which details the engagement activity. So we had 2 formal public meetings, yes, but this talks about the other meetings that we had with members of the public and specific groups, so going out to people. And in terms of meeting with different groups of local council groups in terms of housing estates. That's the word I'm looking for, searching for, and other social groups to make sure that we maximised our ability to go out and meet people, because one of the things that we were really certain of was that it's very difficult to get people to a public meeting. So we wanted to go out to them as much as people coming to a central place to us as well. Nick and I personally spent many a day and evening in places such as the local supermarkets, trying to talk to people on a one-to-one basis as well. So in terms of going out to the public, we tried to do it in multiple ways, in addition to the public meeting, to get people to come.
Yeah, okay. But you were invited to a meeting. I mean, let's look at the figures. With your consultation, there's a difference of 15. Is that correct? Yeah. 15. A meeting was held by the Civic Society, and 16, isn't it? Sorry, I didn't count it properly. 99% of the so many thousand people, apparently, 3,080 returns, were in to retain that. So I'm just trying to get the feel that we have one side doing their consultation. You didn't turn up to the meeting, apparently, or maybe you couldn't, or that is a concern. You were invited. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure sometimes it's uncomfortable being confronted. I understand that as a politician. You've got to knock on doors. That can be very difficult. But in reality, I just feel, before we go anywhere else, I'm not. I don't think the Secretary of State's the right answer. I think the answer is we need to revisit the consultation process. I think it needs to be looked at again, to really a bit more depth, because we wouldn't have these many people here today if it was done properly.
Caroline's described a number of things that were taking place during the consultation period. We undertook meetings in a whole range of different settings, in particular by attending other existing meetings. One of the feedback we've consistently had as NHS over the years is that actually it's much better to go to where people are than to be looking for people to come to us. And so that was one of the key reasons that we worked with a lot of the existing groups, and the list on page 48 of the various presentations that I remember personally over a period of several months. At any one time I would find either Nick or Caroline was out somewhere in the Ashby area talking with local people about the proposed changes in services, and not just during the consultation period, in the lead up to the consultation period as well. The process we went through to look at the service models, to look at the different options that might be feasible, were things that were worked up. We had working groups in place that included representatives of, including a number of the groups that are in the room today, and they helped to inform the approach we took to that. Quite clearly, Councillor Pearson, where we've got to some months later is that post-consultation we had a significant petition that was generated locally. We did, as a board, receive that in public session and reflect on whether the strength of feeling that was demonstrated through that petition could or should have changed the decision that our board had reached. So we openly and transparently considered it as those things became available. But ultimately, the assessment of the board was that whilst we noted the strength of feeling and concern that was being expressed, particularly about alternative services and then being put in place, the board didn't feel that those things would have materially changed the decision that was taken as an organisation.
I understand that. Look, I believe I support the Better Care Fund, and I do support care in the community, there's no question. But also, consulting with the public is very difficult, and it's an expertise. I'm a member of the PRG group for Latham House, we've got 36,000 patients. And we had a meeting and 7 people turned up. And we said, is it their fault, or are we consulting properly? And I still feel, it's not easy, that I believe you felt you've consulted. Yet on the other side, the public don't think you have. And maybe there's somewhere we can meet in the middle and relook at it somehow, because I don't think the views are being, as you can see today. And I do think, for everybody's sake, the worst thing we could do is go to the Secretary of State, because, as been proved before, you can come back and blow up in your face. You say, no, to do what you like. We're still, to a certain degree, all of us here today have got some say. I think there's a chance still to go back and reconsult and get the real views and then revisit it.
Can we just stick to the debate? Toby, come back, then I'll move on, because I'd like to hear other members' views on the idea.
Sure, OK. When we undertook the consultation last year and it closed in April, we didn't stop listening and talking since then, and that's when a lot of some of the groundswell has come forward, which we've heard. The meeting that you made reference to that we didn't attend or chose not to attend was in the early part of 2015 of this year. So that's kind of quite some time after the consultation period. Now, myself, Caroline, and a number of others met with the Civic Society. I remember coming out to 2 evening meetings just before Christmas last year. I attended on one occasion and was invited back the following week. I rearranged my diary and was there along with other colleagues from LPT and from the CCGs. And we had a discussion at that meeting about really this very topic, which was, we've had a consultation, there is some feedback, quite significant feedback coming through, that people are uncomfortable with some elements of that and have raised questions through that. And on the back of that, we agreed with the Civic Society and with the Town Council that we would hold another couple of public meetings during the early part of this year in order to take the opportunity to share the plans, to share some of the ideas and the proposals that were coming through. This wasn't about reopening the consultation, but it was about helping to explain locally to the public and to partners the kind of services that Jude and Nick have been talking about that were being put in place. And we reached agreement just before Christmas about doing that event jointly, because we, like you, thought that was the best way forward here about working. We absolutely did reach agreement to run those events and that event jointly. We picked a time, we picked a date, we arranged the agenda together. Entirely within their own rights, the Civic Society felt it was appropriate to hold a separate session shortly before that. We felt, having worked together to create something that we thought would address some of the gaps you've described, was the right way forward. And we continue to run that session in Hood Park. I was there that evening together with Caroline and colleagues from other services in the system. So I just want the committee to get a sense that we haven't closed down the discussion here at any point. We've also welcomed the Civic Society members and others to our public meetings of our CCG board on a number of occasions where they both raised questions in advance that our board has considered and reflected on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Move on to Geoffrey.
Chair, I hope you'll bear with me. I'm new on this committee, so I'm picking it up as I'm going along, and there are a few problems that I foresee. I understand the aim is that you're going to have to reduce the number of people actually in hospital, and those that are in, you want them in safer settings, and you've got to have them, from what I picked up this morning, something like 2 wards with 21 people each to make it work safely, effectively, whatever it is. And I have to say, I've no great love, but I can understand the people of Ashby's love for a building built in 1897 and faithfully looked after by the town, and I can accept that sentimental thing. I can also accept that whatever you've done will never be enough as far as consultation. But the thing that worries me, you mentioned that there has been there's been no loss of facilities for inpatients since you're only using 4 beds, but it was 16 beds, and the people and the list of places you said that they were sent to were Market Harborough, Hinckley, Loughborough, and I think probably somewhere else. Well, whatever. What worries me is a person sent there is like being sent to exile if they're visitors and people can't get to see them. Now, I know there are less people will be going in, and that's a whole exercise which let's do. But what arrangements, because surely part of people's recovery and well-being in hospital is having access to family and visitors. What have you arrangements would be part of this plan? So somebody is, I don't know, Loughborough, I don't know my geography that well, but all right, Hinckley, I don't know that. What arrangements would you ensure for their welfare that they're not sent to Siberia or the equivalent of?
So the aim of the discharge process when people are coming out of acute hospitals is to get them to somewhere closest to home. So the ideal place for patients from Ashby is Colville. So the that's the closest. Once we close the beds in Ashby, that's the closest environment. So we'd always try and ensure that patients were placed there. What we have to remember is that our policy is actually home first. So rather than going from acute hospital into a community hospital and then into the community setting, what we aim to do with this model of care is to get people home first. So it's just one move for a patient, so it's less disruptive. The method of admitting patients to places, to hospitals elsewhere in Leicestershire, is no different from the process that we did prior to the closure of beds. And when we looked at the number of the people who were inpatients in Ashby beds, 75% of them came from different places anyway, and probably Colville. And so in terms of what we do to try and mitigate the placing of patients in hospitals that aren't that close to home, is that we focus on getting them out as soon as possible, because that is where we want them to be. They want to be discharged, we want them to be cared for at home as well. So that's our aim, to do that, and trying to mitigate the distance by ensuring they're admitted into hospitals close to home. Sometimes we're unable to do that because of the nature of the care that we need to provide. So if we need to provide specialist rehabilitation, we can't provide that in every single bed because you need the specialist staff to be able to deliver that. So in some instances that I know the Civic Society have quoted to me, patients have been admitted either into hospitals from Burton out into Staffordshire, into specialist rehabilitation beds, because we don't have those facilities. But we need to remember that those facilities were never there in Ashby in the first place. So again, it's not a change to policy.
I think, unfortunately, if you look at the admissions to all of our county community hospitals, because there is specialisation, ladies and I was saying, if you look at admissions into all of our county community hospitals, you will find people are travelling some distance between them because of specialisms and all the rest of it, and it is an ongoing problem borne by the geography of the county and the number of places around the edge. And I see where you're coming from, Geoffrey, but I have the same issue in my own division. People going to Loughborough or anywhere you like within reason. If you have a spinal injury, you can end up in Sheffield, and that's a killer in terms of the family going to visit. But if that means the difference between you walking or not walking, because I know some of this happened to, you will go there with your family because that's where you get the care you need. Sorry, Terry, or carry on.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to thank the Ashby Civic Society for bringing this to our attention, not particularly because I support asking Jeremy Hunt's opinion on it, and I take on board everything that has been said by our chair on that issue, but because it has enabled us to truly scrutinise this, which is the very first stage of what we have also discussed in this meeting, which is the community, the new vision for community hospitals. Now, as I understand it, because of the question posed by Ashby Civic Society, we've got two tests to consider. One is, was there a proper consultation? And two is this right for the Leicestershire health economy? I'm going to take those two things slightly separately. Looking at the consultation, you've provided us, and I'd like to ask people if they've got access to look at pages 47 and 48 in their papers.
Depends whether you look at the bottom or the top of the page.
Top of the page, 49 and 51. Looking at the level of engagement, and I'm taking on board the comments from Councillor Alan Pearson, I often complain about this authority, that its consultations consist of one option, this is what we're going to do you mind? Usually done in the form of an electronic survey. Having seen a very dear place close in Colville just recently, which will remain nameless. Thank you. Looking at the pages that we've got with the listening booths, the two meetings and the community groups, do you think that you covered enough of the population to be sure. I mean, I know in the sense that hindsight is not necessarily the best way to work out whether the engagement was correct, because people will always turn up and lie in front of the bulldozers at the last minute. As I saw with Snibston, there was a whole new group of people turned up to try and save it after it had closed. So do you feel that that is adequate, that is, and has covered enough of the population? Because if this were to get as far as Jeremy Hunt, that would be one of the first things he would look at. And then I think for me, this is as someone who's more interested in what happens to the patients. Is this right for the Leicestershire health economy? You're telling me that before these beds were closed, only 25% of the beds were actually occupied by people with an Ashby postcode. I'd be interested to know, and I do realise that Colville is a very, very long way from Ashby. Very long way. I mean, there's a Sahara between, I believe. What percentage of people with an LE65 postcode are then using the beds in Colville for their rehabilitation and care? That would be an interesting point. Well, I totally take on board everything that's said about going as far as Market Harbour. I don't even know where it is. It's the other side of the county. And then also to follow up, I think, on Councillor Sheehan made some very interesting points, which I think you followed up on. You were saying that there was always access to beds when we need them. Can you then categorically say that there were no people from the LE65 period who suffered a delayed transfer of care out of UHL due to a lack of a community bed? And I'd be interested to know how many people from the LE65 postcode use the ICS beds. And I must say, Judy Smith, I'm very impressed with the idea of having the night nursing service. That could solve all of the problems that I foresee with trying to do what we're trying to do, and I do hope that rolls out. And then coming back to the community hospitals review, which we heard earlier, you're looking to provide a very different way of using the community hospitals, having subacute wards. And I know I asked Mary Barber, what would stop a community ward hospital being a subacute ward? And so to focus down on the ward, which I understand was a single nurse-led ward of 16 patients, what would stop that from being the modern subacute ward that you are now looking to achieve as per the hospital community review? Sorry, it's a lot of questions. Hope you got them all.
Okay, I'll start off with the consultation bit, and then I'm going to bring others in terms of some of the clinical model side of things. Your question around consultation was looking back now, with hindsight, at what we undertook as part of that consultation process. Do our boards, LPT and the CCGs, think what we conducted was a sufficient exercise? We have asked ourselves that question, you'll not be surprised to know. We've asked it in response to the feedback that we've had in the months since that exercise. The way we put the consultation process together was something which I think Councillor Pearson made reference to, kind of expert opinion and getting specialists who do this kind of work. We work with our partners in GEM, who provide us, Greater East Midlands Commissioning Support, who provide us with support in this area. And so we looked at what we'd done in previous consultation exercises. So in Loughborough, one of the early exercises that West Leicestershire Commissioning Group formally consulted on was the relocation of a walk-in centre from Pinfold Gate to the community hospital. We learnt from that experience in terms of how we undertook exercises, how we tried to get feedback, the different routes we used. And so this wasn't a first naive attempt at consultation from an organisation that didn't have some experience of this. It also wasn't an exercise that was not informed by experts in that arena. Could we do more? Could we do things differently? Of course we could. We always can. Methods of communication are changing. How we interact with patients, with the public, outside of some of the more formal, traditional things we've done have changed enormously over the last few years. Were we doing the exercise again in the next month or two? And when we get into the exercises around Hinckley, will it look identical? No, it won't. There'll be things that we will do differently. I think the key question for us as a board when we've come back and revisited this, though, has been, do we think what we did was sufficient to identify the range of opinions within the local area to make sure we took a really informed decision? We believe that we did, and we believe that the feedback we've received since has reinforced and underlined some of those opinions and has strengthened them, but has not materially added to different issues or different opinions that have been raised. That's why we feel the consultation exercise was still valid, and we're comfortable that it allowed us to take a proper decision. In terms of the
Okay, in terms of where patients go, the data at the time, when we looked at all the data during the consultation process, indicated that patients discharged from UHL tended to go to Colville, but they did go to Market Harborough, Loughborough, Hinckley, because the overriding aim is if a patient needs a rehabilitation bed, they get a rehabilitation bed. Interestingly, what was different for patients in Ashby being admitted to Burton Hospital, to Queen's Hospital in Burton, was that their discharge arrangements didn't necessarily align with discharging into community hospitals. So patients were delayed transfers of care in Burton hospitals while waiting for community services to be discharged into. What we've seen in terms of the delayed transfers of care out of Burton hospitals is that has reduced, and they're very pleased with the increasing amount of community services available to allow them to discharge sooner. In terms of looking at delayed transfer of care data for the LE65 postcode from internally within Leicestershire, one of the things that I've been working with the Civic Society on is a dashboard of data to be able to share with them on a quarterly basis all of these indicators, and delayed transfers of care for the LE65, LE67 postcode is one of them. And the last 2 quarters demonstrate a reduction in delayed transfers of care from UHL in terms of those postcode areas. So that demonstrates to us that the availability of community services is supporting the needs of the patients coming out of UHL as well as coming out of Burton. And I think you wanted Jude to talk in terms of the ICS beds and the availability of beds, or have I covered it?
Thanks, Caroline. I think you've covered some of it. You, Dr. N, you asked about what we need for subacute wards. We need we need diagnostics, especially X-ray facilities, and that's something that obviously in some of our community hospitals we don't have access to. We need increased nursing staffing ratios. We need more specialist nurses with skills, and we need more access to senior medical oversight. So those are the kind of main tenets of what we would need for subacute wards. The difficulty with single-sited wards is you don't have the challenges that we face with them is you don't have the ability to flex up the increasing patient acuity or staffing needs, because you can't move staff from one to another. You have lone working in the sense that the wards are isolated, so it makes it much more challenging if you have very poor patients that you need to accompany. And we've been analysing over the last few weeks all of the staffing requirements for the range of wards that we have. And for me, a lot of the subacute is about diagnostics and senior medical oversight.
Can you just clarify, when you say that in these single wards without diagnostics you can't flex up, are you basically saying that if the patient deteriorates, your only option is to admit to UHL?
That's correct. So when we can't do an X-ray, we have to admit. We then reduce the staffing levels if we have to then accompany a patient across to one of the acute hospital sites. Whereas with the double-sided wards with diagnostics, we can manage our own deteriorating patients, which we see with some of our other hospitals.
Okay. I wanted to bring Rick Moore. Sorry, David, but I wanted to bring Rick Moore in because you put your hand up. Rick is the chairman of Health Watch in Leicestershire, so I thought it would be interesting to hear his point of view on this.
Thank you, Chairman. Elected members might well be interested in Health Watch's position. A little bit of history. We have maintained a watching brief around this issue through John Baker, and I'm going to mention the names because you might know him. John Baker was formerly chairman of Links, and through Fiona Barber, who is a board member of Health Watch and leads on social care. We have attended meetings, and I attended a meeting with the Civic Society and other supporters some time ago when we were invited essentially to give our explicit support to the campaign against the closure of the hospital. Quite a tricky decision for us. We are, after all, a consumer watchdog, But we made the decision in this case that it would not be appropriate to take sides, so to speak. I mean, I'll stand up and be criticised on that because it was essentially me who led that decision, but that we would take interest at two levels. I'll take the second level first because it's actually a more general point, and I've said it here and in other places many times, that we did not want, through Better Care Together, to see closure of acute beds until we were satisfied about community provision. So that's in the very broadest terms, and that fits in, I think, with the Ashby situation. We were very aware of the passion by those who are against the closure of Ashby Hospital, but the second and probably more fundamental point that we decided to scrutinise within the resources we've got was whether or not we thought the consultation process was appropriate. I use the words appropriate perhaps because of something Councillor Pearson said, because I've never come across a perfect consultation process, and there's always an element of cynicism if the conclusion goes in a certain way. But I can say that my colleagues have told me, who've been closer to it than me, that they are satisfied that the consultation process has been appropriate.
Okay, thank you for that, Rick. David.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It does work. The civic society in Ashby is something I've never heard of before, and I would appreciate knowing whether they are involved in a number of community issues or have just got involved in this one. But to me, the most important thing is if someone is ill, they have the right treatment. If that means moving to another hospital, so be it. But there is a difference between having permanent nursing care, which may be residential, in which case I would want a choice, but going into hospital to be treated and then go home again when you're better, I think people would put that higher than having a local hospital. But is there any choice involved in which hospital people go to?
Okay, so in terms of patients being discharged from Leicester Hospital, as Caroline explained, if those patients need an inpatient community bed, the priority in the process within Leicester Partnership Trust is to look for a bed that is as close to as possible to where the normal place of residence is of that patient, for all the reasons that we've heard in terms of access for family, for friends and those who might want to visit, and also just familiar settings. Where that isn't possible, then alternative community hospital sites are looked at ever-increasing distance. But ultimately, in terms of patient choice, if a patient refuses to accept an offer that is made to them, that we have many instances where patients remain in Leicester Hospital until a bed becomes available in one of those other facilities. Now, I have to say, we've talked about delayed transfers of care earlier on. From a personal perspective and from a health service perspective, in terms of balance of relative need and risk, for me, having acute hospital beds at the LRI, at Glenfield, at the General, where patients are in those facilities but no longer require that level of higher medical support, is not in the best interests of the health system. But patients do, and their families have that right of choice, and we do frequently have discussions, and Leicester Partnership Trust teams do, and UHL with families, with their carers, with relatives, about the potential availability of a bed somewhere that might not be their first preference, but whether actually in the round it's more important for them to be in the right place, and crucially for that bed that they are taking within an acute hospital setting to be available for other acutely ill patients who need that bed.
Kevin, please.
Yeah, I've obviously been listening very intently to what's been going on this subject. And the area I'm going to talk about now is particularly how people access this service. And I'm talking about patients who need to go to the local community services hospital, and obviously, therefore, we're also now talking about friends and relatives and so on. Now, I happen to come from the part of the county that Dr. Ryndon doesn't know anything about, near Market Harbour. But I do know how long it takes for me to get from my village of Kibworth to Market Harbour, and I know which buses to use. I mean, I'm presuming there are reasonable bus services between Ashby and Colville. I do know that Ashby to Loughborough is not good, and at least you have to take two changes. But it would be, just to sort of fill me in on that, is a little bit about the sort of how easy it is to get. And the other point I'd like to say is, when we look at things across the county, quite often schools and indeed other services, we ask people to do a travel plan, and part of that is to assess how easy it is to people to get to, and it's not just visitors but also staff. There's recently, for example, we're doing a big survey at the moment in one of the villages in my patch with a new doctor's surgery, and we discovered that 85% of the staff travel to it by car, even though 50% of those live within half a mile. We also discovered that despite the fact that everyone keeps telling me that people of a certain age, they can't drive, etc., but nevertheless 80% of the patients travel to it by car, and again 50% of those live within a mile. Just interested if there's been anything done at all on accessing how easy it is to get from Ashby to particularly Coltville, clearly, because that's obviously the place you're looking for, but obviously also, we know getting to Market Harbour is 45 minutes, so I'm not going to worry about that one, but Loughborough clearly is an issue as well. Just a bit about the sort of travel and access area.
Sorry, it's part of the consultation process and the business case that we developed for the two boards was a travel impact analysis, and we commissioned an external company to look at that for us, so that when we were making our decision, we understood the impact that it would have. And you're absolutely right, Ashby to Loughborough is a trek. It is an absolute trek. In terms of Colville, it's not great. It is 2 buses to get out to Colville, and it was part and parcel of the difficult decision that we had to take in terms of what was happening. But I think the picture of where patients were travelling anyway was part of that decision-making process, to acknowledge that whilst it's not ideal, the right thing, as your colleague indicates, is that a patient has a bed of the right quality, in the right environment when the patient needs it.
I'm reading some advice. I think I can read it, yes. In the state of handwrittenness, and I'm the last one to talk. We spent a lot of time on this. I don't see anybody else wishing to speak. I think it's clear, the committee members who are entitled to speak then, it's clear there isn't an appetite to refer this to the Secretary of State. I know Alan has explored issues around consultation, but nobody else appears to have picked that up and said, do much more with it, unless I'm misrepresenting what's been said here. I've got what I was just reading actually is a suggested form of words that the committee might like to consider. And if I don't read it, if I stumble, it's because I'm having trouble with the handwriting. It is suggested that we note the information now provided by the CCG concerning the consultation it has undertaken in relation to Ashby Hospital and the plans to meet the needs of patients in that locality. 2, the concerns expressed by Ashby Civic Society and others at the proposed closure of Ashby Hospital, including their request that the matter be referred to the Secretary of State. The second part would be that the committee... Now I've lost... I can't read that bit. That's very kind. The committee, having considered the information now provided, concludes that a referral to the Secretary of State is not appropriate and that in all probability unlikely to succeed. And finally, the committee requests the CCG to have regard to the concerns raised during the debate and to seek to ensure, as part of this, that the Better Care Together implementation plan, community-based services are provided for patients as close to home as safely possible. If we're comfortable with that, I will take a proposer and seconder, and we'll have to conclude the matter there. Sorry.
Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Corfin, you wish to say something.
Yeah, I'm very happy to second that if you're proposing it. But can we add a bit that we really want a rigor input of how successful, so that we know what's going on? I think that's a vital, important bit. And
yeah, I think everybody would support that. I think we can look at this case in particular as well as the whole county review, but I'm quite comfortable with that. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I know it's not the outcome you're looking for, but I think we've been into this in some depth this afternoon and given a good thrashing. I would suggest it's 5 to 4 that we have a 5-minute break just to give... Sorry.
Before we have a break, can we just express our extreme disappointment at the
as the Ashby Civic Society, this matter is not closed.
Okay, thank you. I would. So I'd like to vote on that form of words I've read out, which will be available publicly after. So all those in favour, please show. Thank you. And we'll have a 5 minute. We will reconvene at 4:05 to give everybody a chance to have a break. And if anybody, a member of the public, wish to stay, they can, or you can leave. I leave it up to you. Thank you. We'll take a postal vote. Right then, we'll move now to item 11, which is the review of the Care Quality Commission inspection at Leicestershire Partnerships Trust, pages 63 to 72. We've got Satish Kumar, Medical Director. We're supposed to have Adrian Charles, but I can't see him. So who have we got instead?
We've got Michelle Churchard. I'll let her introduce herself.
Okay, fine.
Hello, I'm Michelle Churchill-Smith. I'm Head of Nursing for Adult Mental Health and Learning Disability Services.
Okay, if you'd like to go through it, Satish, please.
I think there is a paper, but I think I'll make a very brief summary of the key issues there. I think we had a CQC inspection in March 2015. We received the final report on 2nd of July, and we had a quality summit where all the stakeholders attended the quality summit, including the Health Watch Commissioners, Trust Development Authority on 7th of July. What we have provided as a report here is a summary of the CQC visit, what they have found and what we have done subsequent to the CQC visit. On page 65, we have actually a summary judgment, but that summary judgment is based on their inspection of 16 core services where they have actually produced individual report. And I think we have provided actually a table of actually the 16 core services on the page 66. Overall, the trust has received a judgment of requires improvement category, which I think represent actually the journey we have taken from where we were 1.5 years ago. And the context is actually vast majority of the trust inspected by the CQC, around 60 to 65, will be in the requires improvement category. We are not comfortable being there, but I think we acknowledge it as a reality. We have received a good in caring domain in the CQC inspection, but we were rather, I personally was disappointed actually to have the inadequate in patient safety domain, which is based on patient safety being inadequate on 3 main areas of our trust. One is Bradgate unit, other is low secure unit, the third is community CAMS, children's mental health services. Personally, I was disappointed actually because we have actually since 2013, when we received a number of warning notices to the Bradgate unit, we have actually taken quite a number of important steps to improve the quality of the unit, which somewhat reflected in the new report, in the sense actually we had problems with the care plan, we had problems with the risk management before. Those things are actually not an issue in the new report, but we have received inadequate on patient safety based on certain environmental factors, which includes seclusion rooms, structure, ward structure, certain ligature points, and Michelle will give more details of that. As well as actually staffing. The committee has received a paper from us on the staffing and what we are doing, but in spite of actually the intensive effort with direct board scrutiny and the commissioner involvement, staffing continues to be an issue that we are actively managing. In addition to that, we have other areas we need to make improvement, such as in the area of Mental Health Act application, Mental Capacity Act consent and capacity. So we have received some immediate actions following the visit by the CQC, particularly in relation to the patient safety. We have taken immediate actions and reported that back to the CQC. And then in Quality Summit, we received a much more detailed actions with actually must do, in addition, some of which include actually the immediate action they have already told us. We have completed vast majority of the immediate action, one action being rated as amber. Michelle again will give details of how we are managing that, and we are making good progress with all the must-do actions. We have actually streamlined the governance process within the trust to make sure that the trust board has direct oversight of the pace of progress with actions. Not only that, we have actually included commissioner representation and Trust Development Authority representations within our CQC scrutiny committee to have an oversight. And I think what I wanted to say is actually all the actions will be completed in a 6 months time frame, but just completing those actions alone, I don't see it as the task that we have at hand. The task we have at hand is actually setting a continuous improvement cycle across all areas of services that we provide. And I think we have taken measures to set that in motion with the clinical leadership and the other actions that we have actually put in place. I'll stop it there and let Michelle add anything more.
I just particularly wanted to pick up really on some of the main areas of existing improvement work that we need to do within adult mental health services, mainly centred around the Bradgate unit, and the ones that are going to possibly take longer than the 6 months identified in the original immediate action plan. They're mainly related to some of the environmental issues, one of them being around some of the doors that have needed replacing with some specialist locks called Salto devices that allow access in and out that can be locked off at certain times of the day or areas, for example, to promote patient safety. Those actions on those doors will be completed by the end of this week, so that one will actually be closed now. The other areas mainly relate to some general ligature work, particularly focusing on ceiling hatches. And that's where we need to marry a health and safety issue for patients, where there's a potential route for an area where patients wouldn't be monitored, where harm could be caused to those patients. But marrying that, for example, with the need to access the ceiling for health and safety work and for fire regulations. So that's taken a little bit longer to ensure that we're complying with the health and safety and wellbeing of the patients and the health and safety legislative guidelines for access to those environments. So that's one area of the environmental work. All of the other ligature area work that the Care Quality Commission picked up on this visit, which are newer areas of work for us, is mainly around some of the taps and the toilets that we've had that need refurbishment, and that work's actually been completed now. I think the final bit of that work commenced last week, and so all of those ligature points have been addressed now. So the ligature work's been dealt with. There were some general comments about some of the general environments on some of our older wards. And that's just where general upgrade and refurbishment is needed, and the Trust does have an ongoing programme of work related to those. The second large area related to environment is some of our seclusion room facilities. And the CQC commented that maybe some of the access into those rooms and the visibility in those rooms and the communication when you're in that room needed enhancement. So we've just reviewed all of the Trust seclusion facilities in accordance with the new Code of Practice for Mental Health and what they're recommending, and also standards by the Department of Health, building regulations. And we've now got a list of areas of improvement that we would like to make to our seclusion facilities, and are looking at how we're going to progress that. Also, at the same time, balancing that with the Department of Health's requirement to use as least restrictive practice as possible for people when they're admitted to an inpatient mental health or learning disability ward. So we are looking at marrying those two and making sure that the programme means that our seclusion rooms are fit for purpose, but also that are we sure we need all of the seclusion rooms we've currently got, and would we like to change some of our facilities into, for example, de-stimulation rooms? So we're just looking at that with our seclusion group at the moment. And then the last area, which covers environments, and that's the provision for same-sex accommodation, is that some of the wards, particularly 3 older wards at the Bradgate unit, have a traditional hospital ward style, where it's a main corridor with male and female sleeping dormitories off from those corridors, but the main provision of toilets and bathroom facilities are from that main corridor, which is now not ideal under the guidance of the Department of Health. So we're working at the minute with patients, getting their views as well on how we can move those wards to same-sex accommodation and ensure that we're still able to meet the patient flow through the Bradgate unit site. So they're the things that are taking a little bit longer than the additional planned time.
Okay, thank you. I mean, having visited there a while back, I must admit your older wards are in many ways non-ideal for what they're being used for now, and probably need a bit more doing than that, to be fair. Any comments, questions? Alan?
On, isn't it? Oh, sorry, it's me again. I'm still very concerned. I think this has now been on this committee nearly 2.5 years. As you said, it's taken a long time, and that is still concerning, because again, it's the old story. You just seen previously, if things go wrong, it's the council and the political bodies involved. We cop the phone calls and the flack, as you know. So my main concern is still how we're dealing with this. We still seem to focus too much on targets and compliance. I've said this before at a number of meetings this week. And what we should be asking ourselves, what are we clearly doing particularly with what we're trying to change in the staff, do we really understand what work needs to be done and how to improve that from the grassroots of the staff upwards? You're obviously aware, I've met you a couple of times regarding a complaint that I think that's still ongoing about safety, and yet we still see one of the red flags is that safety is an issue. We shouldn't be here. We should be further down the line. I really think we need to either help you, or anything we can do to move this along, because I still feel that as the people there are at risk to a certain degree. You've admitted that in the presentation there. I know you're trying to work to it, but is there any way we can move it quicker and move on so they're not at risk?
If I may, I think in 2013, I think we received actually a number of warning notices which covers a wide area. I think that's actually one of the second highest actually action CQC could take against a unit, I think, which actually covers a wide range of issues, actually including the staff attitude, care plan, risk assessment and management. I think the report actually, while we are disappointed in the sense actually the patient safety is still regarded as inadequate. It's actually itself, if you read the detail of the report, it shows actually those areas actually have improved considerably from that point in time. Where I think we have actually not met the appropriate safety standard, as Michelle has pointed out, is actually predominantly in the environment of the unit, the structure, the environment of the unit. And in addition to that is actually CQC was concerned about the level of staffing. And the level of staffing has been an issue. We have been actually trying to recruit staff, but the reality is actually it's difficult to recruit the number of staff that we would want, I think. And both have actually contributed to the CQC judgment of actually the patient safety being inadequate, I think. And I think in terms of actually the environment, we have actually, it actually has a combination of issues there, actually. Number one is actually, Michelle has pointed out the new mental health code of practice, which actually set the standard much higher than what it was before. And we were actually planning to change it, but we haven't caught up to the level CQC wanted at that point in time. That certainly contributed to that. But following the CQC visit and the action plan, we have taken measures to make sure that we bring it up to the right level of standard. Staffing is an ongoing concern. Our Trust Board knows that, commissioners knows that. I think we have come and presented it here as well. And I think I'm not entirely sure at this stage. Michelle will actually give us more information on that. I think if we could do anything more than what we actually do. And put a perspective, I think since actually 2013 as well as since the CQC visit, we have actually a number of visits from some of the members from here as well, I think including yourself at some point. Yeah. And we had commissioner visits, independent commissioner visits. We have people from Trust Development Authority visiting. Most of the people actually who have visited the ward actually have commended actually how much change they have seen over a period of time and how remarkable the change is. But that doesn't change the reality of actually what we need to do. I just want to put a perspective to it. And I think I've let Michelle talk about the staffing issue in particular.
Hi, staffing is very challenging for us at the moment. There's a national picture around adult mental health nursing at the moment, and that's born, unfortunately, historically, from decisions that most of care for people with learning disability and mental health problems would shift to voluntary sector, private sector, community provision over the years. So at the moment, we're suffering a change in the way that the commissioned placements for nurses were altered probably 10, 15 years ago. We've not seen completely the overhaul of community care that was expected, although obviously that's still the route that's being taken forward. So we do have not the numbers of nurses coming out that we now need to support the infrastructure of hospital provision, and that's across nationally across England. So what we've done is we've recognised that we've got that problem now, and we recognise as well in mental health services we do have a large number of experienced staff that have been there for some considerable time that will be retiring. So what we've done is looked at how we can best manage the staff we've got. Acute inpatient care at the Bradgate unit is a more challenging form of nursing, and it's not for everybody. So when we do have changes in the system and the job opportunities within the trust, we do have a migration from inpatient care to other forms of nursing in the community, for example. So what we've done recently is we've got a plan now that's looking at the longer term issues around nursing, a mid-ground area, which is looking at how we can do some things shorter term, like increasing more recruitment, making working for LPT more attractive. And then we've done an immediate action plan, which is making sure that our areas are staffed safely at the moment. And the things we're doing immediately are we encourage our matrons to participate in clinical activity on the ward and not just focus on dealing with the management of the ward, so have some oversight and some leadership actually directly giving care. We've also looked at ensuring that the bank staff that we use, and LPT has its own bank staff arrangement, and it's about making sure that those staff are skilled and trained to support the care given on the ward. So we're not just having anybody come to support care on the ward, they're trained staff. And then we've also looked at recruiting and changing our job advertisements as well to go further afield. So we're using social media to attract staff. We are aware that a lot of staff that we're attracting to inpatient nursing at the moment are newly qualified nurses. So Leicestershire Partnership Trust, in response to that, and that's across all fields of nursing, not just adult mental health, have changed the way that they offer their preceptorship packet to those nurses to make it more robust, and we're giving them much more supervision on wards to ensure that they're not left to come onto a ward straight after qualifying. So we've got a whole programme of initiatives, which if anyone wanted me to come and talk to again at length, I could do. But we're not idly sitting by and letting the staffing problem consume us. We are actively moving forward on lots of initiatives around that.
I've got to say that this is one of the difficult areas. I mean, it was mental health, I think we'll all agree, was something you put on the back burner, you tried to ignore it. We went from institutions where we locked people away and hid them, and so you haven't got an easy job. I'm the first one to say that, and the first one to support what you're trying to do. It's just that we've got to keep doing our best. It's not an easy field to work in, having worked in it for a little bit, and I know what you're up against, but we've got to continue to improve, and I do appreciate everything you're trying to do, and again, to sit here, and it's not easy, but it is a difficult field of work, so I appreciate that anyway.
Dr. Iron.
Am I working? Yeah. Yes, thank you for providing this report, and I do recognise that the strides that you are trying to make since the warning notices and recently the CQC report. And you mentioned, Satish, at the beginning, the wish for there to be a sense of continuous improvement, and I would like to see that that's not just words. I think for you it's not just words, but I think in many institutions it can become like that. And one of the things that's hearing about kind of programmes and initiatives and plans, and I think, we've been there before. So many times we've had sort of promises that this will get better. And this for me goes back probably more than a decade, and might be two, which is quite worrying. And so I'm wondering if there's a way of improving the publication and communication strategy, which I find it slightly worrying that it's going to reassure me. We've just been through some very robust scrutiny of worrying things going on in health. Better care is naturally worrying, and so it should be. Is there a way of providing the same kind of data-driven, in-depth discussion so that we can see what would good look like? How far are you from that? What needs to change? What hasn't changed? So getting a bit more data-driven and less reassuring.
I think that's a valid point. I think we're happy to come back in future with actually.
I just didn't want us to get overemphasis on what's wrong and not mention what's right, because that what was said about the staff needs to be shared with them and need to be told, well done.
May respond to it. I didn't get into the communication bit that we have done. I think we have carefully thought through how we are going to communicate, particularly to the staff at the Bradgate unit actually who have made actually some intensive effort to improve. So our communication has been about actually the change we have seen from 2013 and the fact actually that we have to do some more. At the same time actually thanking staff for actually the intensive effort we have done. I think we as a exec team and the leadership I think have carefully thought through that process. And I have to say, actually, the media around us has been actually reasonably supportive with that as well.
Yeah, and it's fair to say, Bradgate unit aside and the problems there, but I suppose take a lot of changing. There's areas here where LPT's activities can't be faulted. So it's just, I suppose, taking that final push to move everything out of the red, which you would hope to have been there by now, but it hasn't happened. But at least you know where you're going to get there. Sorry, Sean, you wanted to come in.
Not much of a comment, really. I just want to make a few minor complaints, let's say. The report is okay up to a point. When you get to page 70, though, unfortunately, it tells you the officer to contact Dr. Satish Kumar, but no contact details. In future, perhaps, if we could have that.
Rosemary apologises for that.
No problem. And then, I don't know why I've got this copy, but I've got the one that's in various shades of grey, and we've got Page 65, you've got full colour, I can see it from here, but I've got 2 shades of grey to choose from there, 3 shades of grey to choose from there. It's very hard to read.
I don't know how it happened, but you picked a copy up today rather than the one that was sent.
Exactly, because I'm a sub, and that's why I've got this
my
copy.
apologies.
But this
so Mr. Jennings is the same issue.
This is, for whoever consumption this is intended, it's disempowering, and I just make the point.
The committee clerks seriously.
Okay, and finally, Ernie, you're probably right, but I don't know whether you ought to be coming to Scrutiny and telling us what to do. There you go. Finished.
Call it friendly advice, Ernie, but it's a valid point, and I think we should accept that was it. It's always refreshing, actually, to hear you, Satish, because you tell us how it is, and I like that. You know, we might not be perfect, but at least we know where we are with it. And I guess I think we'll come back with some more information when things have progressed a bit more. It'll be quite good. And if you want to know about ligatures and really be scared, you look at a report on police cells when they go around with a 50p piece and attempt to fit it anywhere. And it's unbelievable. Well, that's another story. Any other comments or questions? Are we content to leave it at that? In a former life, I was on the police authority. We had an inspection. Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to item 12. I can't say this now. Reprocurement of community substance misuse treatment services. We've got Mike Sandys, Director of Public Health, and Julian Mallinson, who's consultant in Public Health, to present the report and answer any questions that we may have. Over to you, chaps.
There we go. Thank you, Chair. I won't hang around. As the report says, the purpose of the report is we are going through a reprocurement of our substance misuse treatment services, and this paper gives an opportunity for Scrutiny to comment on the proposals that we're putting in front of you. Before I hand over to my colleague Julian Mallinson, just to summarise the key points of the paper, I can't help but point out that the cost to the health service and the public purse of issues like substance misuse is such that unless we get this right, all the conversations we've had over agendas 8, 9 and 10 become meaningless. But with that cri de coeur, I will hand over to Julian.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chair. So I think it's worth saying that the specialist community-based treatment services are only one part of a comprehensive programme that public health lead within the council to reduce the harm from drugs and alcohol within our communities. It's also worth saying that this reprocurement is one of the council transformation projects because we've recognised there's an opportunity to do things differently through this reprocurement, both in terms of improving the care for people who have drug and alcohol problems, but also to work in a more efficient way across our region. We'll be taking the proposal to Cabinet on Friday, so I'm presenting the paper this afternoon, to ask for your approval. To ask for your approval of the model that we're proposing, which is part of the consultation that we've been going through. If I could just draw out a couple of themes within the paper. Firstly, how we got to this model, and we've undertaken a number of steps to make sure that we have listened to communities and users and staff within services to reach this model. We've assessed the needs of users. We've surveyed a wide range of stakeholders, reviewed a variety of options, of which this is only one. We've tested the market to make sure that the model we've come up with is deliverable. And we've also undertaken a formal public consultation, and I've attached the consultation questionnaire to the paper. So the proposed model is a collaboration between Leicestershire County Council, Leicester City Council and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. You'll notice in the paper that our work to date has included Rutland County Council, but Rutland have advised us that they're not in a position to progress the tender at this stage with the other parties, but we'll continue to look for opportunities to collaborate with Rutland. So the model is a fully integrated service with a hub and spoke across Leicestershire and the city. It will combine services for adults and young people in criminal justice and other community settings. We believe that will provide the greatest flexibility and continuity of care for the people who use those services. It will be recovery focused, so it's not just about treating problems. It will be about helping people to reintegrate back into communities, back into their lives, which is absolutely essential. We've learned a lot through the consultation engagement work we've done, particularly around the need for age-appropriate services when we bring adult and young people services together. and also the need to retain some in-house expertise, particularly around mental health, which is often concurrent with substance misuse problems, and the criminal justice elements of rehabilitation that need to go alongside treatment. So if I could ask for your approval of that model, and I'd be happy to take any further questions. Thank you.
Brian?
It seems a very sensible idea to work with the city on this one. But I'm also aware that the city is a bit of a different place and probably has a different demographic, and as public health consultants I'm sure you would be able to correct me on that if I'm wrong. And I guess there's also going to be different demographics of the kinds of people who will want to go to the spoke. So I was interested in what would be the characteristics of the places where people might be seen in the community, because there will be some people for whom being seen in a criminal justice associated spoke will be entirely appropriate and they will feel comfortable and at home there. But out in some of the county stick, some of the people who are drinking several of bottles of wine at night are terribly nice middle class people. And I'm also aware about the need to work with the IAP service, and are some of the spokes going to be co-located with that service? And I'm aware that, for example, libraries, certainly in Colville, library is a venue where the IAP service, job clubs and information is available, and that there might be a use and a way of an efficiency in seeing some of our spokes as being co-located in places like that, where we can then move people back into normal life.
That's a very good point, and particularly the last point about recovery reintegration. And key aspects of that are social networks, are being engaged in meaningful activities, and if we can co-locate those services with other services that are helping to do those things, that's absolutely key. So we'll certainly specify those things within the contract. We're going to be specifying for outcomes and working with the provider to agree the appropriate settings, but it's about appropriateness, and as you say, the needs are different in the city and in different parts of the county, and we accept that the providers have a lot of expertise in those areas and can develop an appropriate model in an appropriate setting to meet the specific needs of a particular area or community.
I'm almost asking a question of Julian. I'm also thinking about the role of the communities branch within chief executives, and actually I think you're quite right. In some ways it's up to the provider to specify where they would want to deliver it, but I suspect there is a conversation we can have before we go out to tender, which is trying to facilitate a conversation between the communities branch and libraries, just to chivvy that along in whatever we can do. And that's actually quite a good point.
From my limited knowledge of people recovering from serious drug use, it's as much to do with changing their social network as the physical medical side of things, certainly. Kevin, you want to go next?
Yeah. Thanks very much. I think this sounds great. I mean, I'm fully in support. But in a way, I'd just like to relate a story. Very soon after I became first elected, actually, so back in 2001-ish, we had a terrible situation in my particular patch, as it happens to be, the Kibworths, where we had not just one but 4 youths die of drug-related problems, suicides, and so on. And obviously, it hit the community incredibly hard. I mean, I came into it very new and learned an awful lot in a very short time. And so the question I've got is, if that happens again, where we've suddenly got a particular hotspot, so to speak, will this model... so it was a big education system as well. So just that sort of area about flexibility, really, of what you do about hotspots.
Absolutely, and as you've said, there's a role there for the police, there's a role there for substance misuse treatment services. I think the other strength that we've got in this area is that we have a joint City and Leicestershire drug deaths or substance misuse deaths review panel. So when there is a death, there's a partnership group that get together from the police and the treatment services, look at that death in the context of other deaths that have happened. And the public health team have just done a review looking back over a full year to draw out the learning. And it's highlighted a number of key points. Firstly, that the majority of deaths have been alcohol-related rather than drug-related, and that people have had contact with services in the 6 months leading up to the death. So some really important learning that we're feeding into our, again, a joint substance misuse clinical network, which is bringing together clinicians from across the whole system to really learn from that. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think it's fair to say we're fully sort of confident in the approach. There's some interesting points being raised that have been borne in mind, but let's see what the consultation brings in. And thank you very much for your time. I think Mike's going to stay there, and we're going to now have the oral health of 5-year-olds, which came from the Scrutiny Commission and ended up here thanks to Ruth. And Trish Crowson from Public Health Manager, so to talk us through the report, where we apparently got very bad teeth in the county. Yeah, gives you a smile.
There we go. Absolutely, Chair. So, as you're quite right, the Scrutiny Commission asked us to provide a report on the oral health of 5-year-olds, notably because, for those members that don't know, it's one of the things in the health profiles where Leicestershire is somewhat less good than the national average. It's one of the things that bucks the trend where we're normally average or better. So, I shall hand over to Trish.
Thank you. I'll perhaps put a context on this. Last year there was quite a lot of publicity given to the issue of tooth decay in children, because the media got hold of the news that 26,000 children between the ages of 5 and 9 are admitted to hospital to have a general anaesthetic and to have their teeth taken out. And because that hit the media, and it's the most common reason why children are inpatient admission to hospital. What we do know in Leicestershire is that we have higher levels of dental decay than the national average, which, because we generally have quite a healthy population, we wouldn't expect to see that. But what we do also know from the surveys that are undertaken is that the number of teeth that have some decay in Leicestershire children is less than the national average. So we have more children with some decay, but not as many teeth are affected. Yeah, so it's not as severe. Sorry, Mike pointing out it's not as severe. And dental decay is normally linked to deprivation. That's what we see around most of the country. And in some cases, that doesn't appear to be the case in Leicestershire. Oral health and undertaking an annual survey became a statutory responsibility for local authorities. And as from April this year, we took over the commissioning of both the annual survey and oral health promotion from the NHS. So we have a new provider, and for the oral health survey each year, we've actually commissioned that jointly with Leicester City and Rutland. And we have also commissioned the same organisation to undertake oral health promotion. And we've added some additional resources to that work because it was a very small amount of input previously commissioned through the NHS. And I've put in the report where that different funding streams have come from. So the previous surveys have included 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and that's where we've got our data from. The survey this year, it's set by national level so that we can benchmark against other areas, and the survey that's starting this year is actually of older people in extra care housing. So the main focus of the plan that we've put together is around it being evidence-based, so what works, so what do we know that's worked, and also that's cost-effective. So one of the things we certainly want to do is to do more prevention because we know it's cost-effective and will help to reduce the number of children requiring to have teeth out or teeth filled. The sorts of things that we've done are to include within the red book that every parent gets. So we've got to focus particularly on the under 5s because of the data. So that red book now has information in it about oral health. We have also arranged that, as from April this year, every child at their 4 months, their parent having the 4 months meeting with the health visitor will be given a free toothbrush and toothpaste pack, and that will give an opportunity for the health visitor to start to raise the issue with the parent, saying as soon as the first tooth comes through, start to brush it, go and take your child to a dentist and so forth. And as part of the framework for both health visitors and school nurses, it's written in what they should cover in every contact with a parent around oral health. So we make sure that it's there as a universal service for everybody on the one hand. And then we also have some more specialist and targeted work that we're doing. So we'll be doing things like supervised toothbrushing in preschool settings and focusing and targeting those. We've done a lot of training around healthcare professionals, children's centre staff and others, so they can pass on the right messages. We're also very much trying to promote fluoride varnish, and I can see somebody's actually looking at the fluoride varnish leaflet at this very moment. Very good evidence base to fluoride varnish working, and it's free to every child on the NHS between the ages of 3 and 18. We have some particular projects that we're focusing on where we want to do some more work. So around, for example, tooth extraction under general anaesthetic, particularly for children under 5, and want to look at that piece and that area and work with those parents and families around how we avoid future tooth extractions and it potentially affecting siblings as well. They have to go into hospital to have their teeth out in order to have it done under a general anaesthetic, which can be quite traumatic for small children. So there's some of the things that we're doing. There's more detail in the report, but I'm happy to invite you to ask any questions.
Thank you. I was rather appalled to learn that the previous NHS England was 1 day of one health promoter's time. We've sort of taken it in a matter of months and done all of that, so which is gratifying. Ruth, you wish to set us off?
Yes, thank you. First of all, does the... I'm very impressed with that lot, by the way. I think it's very helpful. And although I have to say, it never happened when we were children, and I put my good teeth down to sweet rationing just after the war. And in fact, my children have never had a thing wrong with their teeth, so I think I must have been a mean mother that never bought them sweets. However, what I was going to ask was, do we have fluoride in our water supply around in Leicestershire? Because I actually don't know. And, yeah. I was going to ask something else, I've forgotten what it was. Anyway, that was the main question I was going to ask. Thank you.
To which the answer is no. No, we don't have fluoridated water, with the exception of there's about 170 households which gets their water from South Staffs. So I do, on a quarterly basis, receive a report from South Staffs that basically says they have added this many parts per million fluoride to the water. But in general, with the exception of those 170 households, no.
Ryan, sorry. Oh, we're fighting now. Who was first? Geoffrey was first.
Chair, many years ago, when they used to have things called community health councils, they're now changed their thing. And, there was a campaign which was vigorously opposed by the then CHC not to have fluoride added to the water. There are some areas in the country that I understand that naturally have it in the water. Do we have the statistics of the difference that it actually makes by comparing it with the areas that have fluoride, and is it worth taking up a campaign? I don't know whether compulsory medication is basically what it is, but is it worth starting a debate again if it significantly works? I know it got a bad name because somewhere in Cornwall, somebody put a tank full of fluoride and ruined the water supply. But it was a big thing in those days, and it seems to have died a death.
If you compared the level of decay between, say, for example, Manchester and Birmingham, the level of decayed teeth in Birmingham is a lot less. So there is good evidence that fluoride works. However, that doesn't mean that in Birmingham they don't have any tooth decay and they still need to do other interventions. It isn't very simple and straightforward to do it because of the ways in which you would have to dose the water and the water systems. It would require working with a lot of other local authorities in order to do that. There is quite a vociferous group that campaign against fluoridation. But I think that, and also to dose the water would be quite a considerable expense to the local authority, and it would be a cost that would be had to be borne by a local authority. So I don't know if that answers the question that you were asking. If you want to add to that, Mike.
You've outlined what the issues would be. So, yeah, there is evidence that it would be effective. It does come at cost, not so much financially, but there's obviously opposing views around mass medication. And if we wanted to do that, that's something we'd have to play out within the council. We couldn't do it on our own because it's based around water treatment areas. So as a minimum, we'd have to take on board City and Rutland because of where our water comes from. So there's always an issue there. I suppose the alternative is things like fluoride varnishing, and the health promotion campaign that we've got is the important thing is kids get fluoride on their teeth one way or the other. I suppose in some ways the packs that Trish actually led on commissioning is a way of making certain we take the first step forward. We can always have a debate around fluoride in the water, but I'm always trying to celebrate what's been done as opposed to open up a debate on the other. The other bit, as you've reminded me, Camelford, which was it was aluminium rather than fluoride. I just remembered, mainly because I was living down there at the time. But, okay.
I think if you thought the Ashby meeting was exciting, we get to fluoride on the water, we'd be to another level. Sean.
Thank you. I'm intrigued to know where the villages are that are getting fluoride in. It might be in my patch or very close by. You can either tell me now or later, whatever you think. But the question I really wanted to ask is, has anybody looked at reducing intake of sugar? I mean, I know Jamie Oliver's been on about a sugar tax, which is an idea that's been kicked around, and he's picked up on it. He's obviously a very active food campaigner from time to time. But I'd be a bit concerned about substituting sugar with other things like saccharin and aspartame, because there's concerns about them as well. So it's a tricky one. And I think taxing sugar, I mean, we tax fuel, but I don't think it stops people using it. I think taxing other things like alcohol and, well, perhaps not that so much, but certainly cigarettes works. But sugar, not sure it would work. But I'm interested to know if there's any thought been given to that.
Not locally, because again, in terms of a local sugar tax, it's one of those things that's out of our control. From an Association of Directors of Public Health point of view, yeah, there are some DSPH who would argue that a sugar tax is a good thing. I'm not convinced. It's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. I'd sooner put the effort into some of the more local work we could do around planning, pizzas, some of the education stuff, and the weight management clinics that we've got. It's funny how the sugar tax is driven by obesity and diabetes, and I suppose actually Jamie Oliver doesn't really, unless I've missed a trick, pick up on dental health. One of the issues for me, though, I think it probably would be fair to say that's this sense that we've got more kids with an element of decay in Leicestershire, but actually in terms of severity and the number of teeth, it's less than national average. That would suggest that there is something around exposure to sugar, be it sweets or parents giving their children sugary drinks at a very early age. There's certainly something about sugar in drinks that is part of this problem, but I don't suspect the answer is a tax at this stage.
Just add to that, I think one of the other things that we're doing through the Healthy Tots programme, which we run in Leicestershire, is all of those establishments that work as part of the Healthy Tots programme always provide children with milk or water to drink, and only very occasionally very diluted orange juice, which would be with a meal. And they don't give them lots of dried fruits. And I think that what we very much need to move to is encouraging children and parents not to give children sugar in the first place, because if you've not had it, you don't miss it. So all those establishments are very much focusing on children have a choice. Do you want milk or water to drink? And it's a very good start in terms of trying to reduce the amount of sugar that children start taking in the first place.
Alan, do you want to have a bash?
Just some quick points, because we've been here a long time. First of all, Leicestershire, and Leicester. Is there a issue regarding the tooth decay that you've pointed out regarding the population profile? Having lived in other parts of the world, some of the food you eat, the sweets, the way you eat, not sweets in as lollies, as in very high in sugar. That's number one. I don't know what you can answer that. Secondly, as bad as sugar is fructose. So when we advise kids to eat lots of fruit, I can tell you, destroys the teeth. And if you see research on fructose, it is absolutely... So if you want to lose weight, you don't eat fruit. Fructose, sorry, it's the way I say it. It's an Australian way we say it. Forgive me. You've got good teeth, actually, so you must have fluoride. so got his baby teeth. So that's number Number two. So it's just interesting because you mentioned deprivation, but it's the population mix. I just wonder.
We have given some thought to that, and one of the pieces of work that we've just commissioned is a piece of insight work to try and work and find out and do lots of interviews with parents and others to find out why it is we have higher levels of decay than we would expect. Some of it will probably be cultural, but in other cases it may be that, for example, parents think that they're giving their children a healthy diet by perhaps giving them undiluted fruit juice and dried fruits. Eating fresh fruit, for example, as a snack generally is fine. It's the concentrated fruit juices that we would be particularly concerned about. So having fruit at a meal as a dessert and so forth is absolutely fine, but we would discourage snacking on dried fruits and having undiluted fruit juices. So that's the main things we point out.
Okay, well, I won't go. Well, we'll talk another time because just the last few things. Jamie Oliver, if you buy his book, I've got one in the car, you should see the sugar he puts in his sweets. Terrible. And one thing I did miss here, that kids, research does say electric toothbrushes, you can buy them for £1.50 down at Wilko's, put a battery in it, they're great. They work better than normal brushes. Electric toothbrushes, seriously. And finally, which I'm absolutely shocked to the bone, that on page 98, we haven't got colour in my book either. So I'm very, very Miss Sheehan, I can't believe that we've been treated this way. I know they are. It's right. Okay, I just thought I'd make that point. Thank you.
Terry.
Just picking up on the sugar, and I think the tax, I agree, is a tricky one. But Jamie Oliver's got a point. But where do we have influence? Because it sounds like you can get your information into a lot of places. But how can we get to the point of sale? And where are parents, say, picking up their baby milk, and then might be moving on to picking up sugared baby drinks? Is there any mileage in getting this information into chemists so that we get the message across that actually you don't need to give children sugar to drink at all?
Yes, part of our programme is very much to try and work with all the different ranges of professionals who come into contact with parents, and obviously point of sale is one of those areas we'd probably want to move on to. So chemists certainly would be, but obviously parents buy them from elsewhere. So at the moment we're very much working with all of the professionals that work with parents and have contact with parents as the starting point, in terms of trying to give a bigger profile to this. But we've also done some things in things like community libraries with regular readers and talking to parents through those networks as well. So we're trying to sort of move out from the areas I think that's probably easiest for us to reach, which is the health and care professionals and preschool settings as a starting point. But I take your point about where people buy things from, and it would be certainly one we'd want to look forward to. But we will also use the insight that we get from parents about what messages they think would have the most influence with them.
Finally, Geoffrey.
I'm sorry to be awkward about this, but I think one of the problems is that people really don't know what is the good thing to give the children. Because my granddaughters, they're grown up-ish now, but when they were little were not allowed to have sweets because they were bad for you. So what do they get fed? The little packets of raisins. They were healthy for you. That was perceived as a healthy drink, a healthy food. Give it for a snack, they won't have. And I think you then also get, when you're slightly older, these foods, fat-free foods, is it? Full of sugar. They don't tell you that. And I think one of the problems is parents easily need to be able to identify what's bad. Because I've just learnt this afternoon that if I give the baby raisins, those whatever things, I'm harming them. But I thought I was being a good grandparent by not giving them sweets. I mean, I can't bear raisins and stuff like that. But
I can see a forthcoming scrutiny report coming up, because actually we've gone from teeth into sugar and food, and it's not lost. And I think that's actually really healthy. I know I've been talking to members of our team, Liz, who works with Trish. What we haven't got in Leicestershire is if you Googled it and you looked up Brighton fork to spade or whatever, fork to plate or whatever it's called, is an overarching Leicestershire food plan. Because there's a number of things in there. There is some good stuff that I'd talk about in terms of the work that we've kept going with the Healthy Schools programme, which does give that kind of diet information for kids. There is the weight management and physical activity work that we'd celebrate, but we've never quite got it all together with our partners in district and boroughs and the NHS to start thinking around collectively what we're going to do around planning, allotments, food banks would be another obvious one, because food banks, fine, but actually no one's really advising them around what's healthy food to donate and to distribute. And I've had that conversation with members of our team about, well, look, is this the right time now, we're 2 years into transition, for us to show a bit of leadership around food and bring that all together in the plan? And actually, I'm sort of going, what a great idea, because if that's what the interest of Scrutiny is, it does kind of gird my loins in some ways to go away and actually come up with that food plan and bring it to Cabinet and CMC and to Scrutiny as well. So anyway, yeah, that was the point. I think it's probably our next step.
Can I just say, though, when you do that, just in reality, we need to look at both sides of the science. As a sports scientist, I use the National Health Guideline to what people should eat and what not to eat, because it was wrong. Because starch, etc., bread, rice, pasta is full of sugar. Starch is sugar. So we're having diet plans. So what we need to do is let's go back and look what other countries do and look at what elite people eat. Well, they don't have to, it's not expensive. And look at actually get away from this fold. I mean, in reality, some of the science we've been following is not proper science. There was a guy called Andrew Key, I won't go into it, who designed the fat-free stuff. And he designed it, and his research was purely to say you bought it. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is we need to get real on this nutrition stuff, but we need to look at alternatives, because some of the stuff I'm seeing printed and being served in school is still full of sugar.
Okay, I think it's... Sorry, Mike. I mean, I think it's fair to say we've gone from a situation with the child oral health side of things, where we started off, of virtually nothing, to a real sort of sea change that hopefully will make a difference in time. I mean, unfortunately, it's to wait till the next few cohorts come along before we hopefully see a difference. So I'm pleased about that. I think touching on the whole issue of food and how that ties into a lot of agendas, let's be quite honest, is probably one that certainly this committee would say, let's do some more on that if the appetite's there within the organisation. Because I think you're right. And I think, and I think Alan's point's valid. We do have to sort of think a little bit about the advice that's given. People get incorrect ideas, but it's degrees, isn't it, of what you eat. But we won't go there, because we could be here all afternoon talking about food, and we've been here long enough as it is.
The people with the best hearts in the world are Indians that eat the most fat. Science has been wrong.
Yeah.
I have 2 bottles of wine and a beer diet.
Lots of carbohydrates, sadly, though, if you're following that diet. Okay, so thank you for that, and it was useful and actually sent us in an interesting direction. Go on then. Final word to Mr. Sanders.
I need to check. I need to say that I have clocked which members have drunk water during the course of this afternoon and which members have got cans of Diet Coke in front of them. So there we go.
How do you know this isn't full of gin? Fizzy gin in that case. Right, we'll now look at the quarterly performance report, and thank you for hanging around for so long, and the poor people with the dental health services have been very patient indeed. We've got Andy Brown, who's the team lead in performance and intelligence, Kate Allardyce, who's from the Greater East Midlands Commission Unit, presenting the performance report. And I'll just observe now that these people can't answer why some of these things are like they are. They just collect the data so we can go, we better have a look at that chap. So if you start questioning like why is it like this, they can't tell you. They can tell you perhaps why something goes from amber to red and what the threshold is, but the underlying reasons, we can't go there. Sorry, Nick, carry on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The paper before you brings forward the end of Q1 performance report with data up to June. Some of it is older data where data doesn't flow as quickly, and we have got some new bits of data which we'll update you on as we go through.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'll try and sort of whiz through and pull out the key points for you. The report's put into 3 sections with 4 dashboards. I'll take you through the Better Care Fund element. Kate's the expert from the Arden and GEM Commissioning Support Service who will deal with the CCG indicators and the provider indicators. And I'll finish off around public health, children's health data. So in terms of the first area, the Better Care Fund and the performance framework around that, you're probably aware of the 6 key metrics and measures with various target points set around that to support delivery of the integration metrics and to sort of demonstrate some of the outcomes around it. In relation to the first 3 areas and targets that are set, some sort of good news so far in terms of delivery and the impact on the metrics. So admissions to care and nursing homes related to delaying dependency are all sort of positive at the moment and are on track in terms of the forecasts. And similarly, older people at home, 91 days after discharge that we measure at various points, that's looking positive again. It's around 83% against a target of 82%, which is sort of a reflection of some of the re-ailment services and the work they're doing, which is good. And also positive news around the delayed transfers of care metrics. There's various ways it's measured in different parts of the system for different providers, but all of the ways it's measured is pointing in the right direction at the moment. Some positive progress on that issue, which did spike, as you recall, last autumn. It seems to be back under control and actually reduced quite a bit. A lot of activity that's gone into that's brought it back on track and well within the Better Care Fund performance metrics. Not so in terms of the emergency admissions target, and that's the one that's got the pay for performance rewards on it through the Better Care Fund. So increasing pressures around emergency admissions rather than reductions. Some positives in terms of the schemes supported through the BCF. So a number of schemes have been put in place to help. They've reduced admissions by over 1,000, slightly short of their target in themselves, but making a positive contribution. And lots of further work underway to build on those schemes and improve them and work in other parts of the system. So there has been some agreement around the reward grant and the BCF provision that's been made in terms of £2 million being released into the BCF fund for reutilisation on schemes and £1 million held by the CCGs because they're paying the costs of the admissions. And the final 2 areas, patient experience measured through the GP survey related to long-term conditions, not really seen any improvement so far around that, so that's still an area to sort of bring through. And injuries, admissions due to falls, still not able to accurately measure that in accordance with the definition, so further work's going on around that. Hope to be able to bring that back to you next time. Paragraph 15 just sets out some of the schemes issues that are still progressing through BCF funded interventions, business case being done for the Glenfield Hospital Admission Avoidance Scheme, further work around bed-based re-ailment and progress with the safe minimum transfer data set due to go live around November. So I can just sort of hand over to Kate for the next section.
Thanks. The next section is really around provider and CCG metrics. So as Andy says, the data is actually just up to Q1. So what I will just do is provide you with a very brief update where there has been some changes from Q1 to current data that we've got. Just wanted to make you aware that all 3 of the referral to treatment indicators have been met at UHL since May. So those that have sat around this table for the last year or so will know that that's really extremely good news. There's been some issues around diagnostic waiting time. So this is around patients that should have their diagnostic tests within 6 weeks. And that's problems around endoscopy and the actions that UHL have taken to that is that additional weekend lists have been put on and we're expecting recovery by September. So that will obviously be one that we keep an eye on. Just wanted to flag with you these 52-week waiters at UHL. This is around orthodontics, which is actually commissioned by NHS England and not the CCGs. And this is as a result of some waiting lists that were reviewed and has identified obviously a significant number of patients that have been waiting longer than 52 weeks. Significant number of actions that are being taken to address that. All patients that are on that list have been contacted to see if they still need treatment. They've actually closed the service to new referrals with some with some clinical exceptions, and they're also looking at Northampton General Hospital for the patients that live closest to that setting, looking at alternative providers. Within the UHL public board papers, there's a big section on these 52-week waiters, so I'd refer you to that for anything else that you wanted to know on that particular indicator. A&E waits, the 4-hour wait target. So there's been steady improvement from April to the current day, still not achieving the 95% nationally set target, but UHL are now ranking mid-table nationally compared to the bottom 10, which they were last year. And as we've picked up, the emergency admissions and attendances have actually been higher from last year, but we are still, that 4-hour wait it is improving, so that's good news. Cancer wait times, I'm on to paragraph 21, 22 now. Main reasons for the breaches really are around the increased number of GP referrals, patient choice, so actually patients are choosing to go to UHL as opposed to other providers, and capacity constraints. UHL are working with the CCGs to improve the referral criteria, so that's making sure that they get the GPs to understand that they're referring appropriately, and also making patients aware of the urgency of particularly around the 2-week waits, because some patients are still reluctant to attend despite them being put on that 2-week wait list. 62-day waits are still a concern, but as there are improvements across the 2-week wait, that would then have the knock-on effect, and performance on 62 days should actually improve. And there's now a dedicated cancer navigator within urology at UHL who is looking at tracking patients throughout the system to make sure that breaches are reduced as much as possible. The only other couple of bits that I would just pick up on is around the dental patient experience. So every 6 months there's a patient survey that goes out, and it's a randomly selected set of patients, and that's around the questions are asked around their experience and access to NHS dental services. So there's some information there around particularly what the east part of the county are actually doing to support some of that. Again, this is commissioned by NHS England and not by the CCGs. The only other section that I'd just pick up on, which isn't mentioned in the report, is around the GP patient survey, and both CCG, so both West and East areas, have actually seen a reduction in the patient experience of access, and this was picked up certainly at Health and Wellbeing through Health Watch, and certainly CCGs are doing a significant amount of work with local GP practices to address some of those access issues, and examples of that are reviewing the telephone system to make sure there's enough incoming lines, make sure there's enough reception staff, looking at clinical skill mix and advanced nurse practitioners within practices, and they're also carrying out local satisfaction surveys with their patient participation groups. Okay, that's my section, I think.
And just to finish off with a few final points related to the public health data and dashboard. Paragraph 38 refers to the data published by Public Health England in June. Most areas are better than the England average. A couple of areas that are flagged around incidence of melanoma and recorded diabetes. A lot of work's been done by the Public Health Intelligence team in terms of analysing the public health data in say, a lot more detail as part of the JSNA. That's just been released on the Leicestershire Statistics and Research online website. So if you're interested in a lot more of that data and the analysis, that's now available. And I understand that will come through to you in November alongside the Director of Public Health's annual report. So there'll be more detail around that. Substance misuse you've had a report on before, so I won't go into the detail on that. Similarly, smoking cessation, there's been a change of provider in relation to that, and some positive early indications around the performance from Quit 51. Physical activity, if I can just update you with some latest figures that came out last week from the Active People Survey, with some positive improvements around physically active adults in Leicestershire, up to 59.9%, so that's sort of borderline top quartile, so that's good news, but still an area to sort of focus on moving forward. There's a lot of work through the sports partnership, particularly around that.
Physically inactive adults has gone down to 24.8%. That is the top quartile, but I'm sure still an area that the public health will be focusing on to improve that sort of quite sizable core of inactive adults, to reduce that further moving forwards. Child obesity figures are due out in October officially. We've had some early data that we're looking at. It's not validated yet, but there are signs of improvement locally in that, and we'll bring that through to you as soon as that's validated later in the year. Breastfeeding, there's been some reduction in initiation, but an increase in prevalence at 6 to 8 weeks. So still a priority area with lots of work going on around that. Child oral health, you've had a report on. Infant mortality, similar figures to the previous period, currently second quartile, and a steady increase in NHS health checks take up towards the target of 61%, currently at 47%. And just in terms of mental health, I'm conscious you had a report previously around that, so I won't go into the detail, but still a number of metrics we've got to focus on that are rated kind of amber, 1 or 2 reds, so that's clearly an area that needs continued focus, lots of improvement plans in place around that.
Okie dokie, so this is to inform our future focus. Any comments, questions, Terry?
2 areas, I think, for future focus. One, I think you just touched on mental health. I'm concerned about the percentage of adults in contact with secondary mental health services who are living not in settled accommodation, and is that something that this committee would like to take an interest in and perhaps work with our district partners to look at. And the other one comes back to all the stuff we've been doing all afternoon about admissions. I remain concerned, despite reassurances, that the term avoided admissions is a fudge, and it looks like we've got rising emergency admissions. We've got static, at best, 30-day readmissions. We've got rising unplanned hospitalisation for chronic ambulatory care sensitive conditions. So despite everything that we're hearing from Better Care, things still going in the wrong direction. So I think we as a committee need to keep this one on the radar.
I'd agree with that. I'm just pleased that A&E's finally heading in the right direction. So that's really good news. But I agree. I think we do need to be keeping an eye on all of it. It's something that is a concern. Alan, do you want to come in?
Yes, just a couple of things. Again, I just mentioned it earlier about sort of the teeth and diet. Mike knows where I'm coming from, I hope, anyway, with physical activity. Research in physical activity has little or no impact on obesity. I'm a sports scientist, and we do it all the time. The health seems to go on about physical activity and obesity. Actually, physical activity is more important. We're about heart health, about moving people, circulatory diseases, etc., etc. Physical activity is far more important. The main impact on obesity is diet. I think we know that. So sometimes we would love to get together and rehash our marketing to people, because I think sometimes we constantly hit the obesity aspect of it. We see it a lot, and there's a lot of silos, as you're aware of, and that is a concern for me. That in reality, real science that I understand, is physical activity is more important in other aspects. Diet is the main issue. Secondly, so I've got it here. I've showed it to somebody, and now I don't know where I've put it. Sorry. I'm playing around now. Oh, here we go. The second concern is for me is, I don't know who's done this. There was something, Move It Boom, and this was a Leicestershire Partnership, National Health Service, and must have spent a lot of money on it. It's for programmes to get children active, health, etc. And County Sports Partnership didn't know nothing about it. The public health in this building wasn't consulted, and we've got the senior nurse, no disrespect to Maggie Clark. Why aren't we joining this up? This is not very good, I've got to tell you. And why can't we, as a Leicestershire, get together and spend money sensibly? We've got a very good county sports partnership. We've got a very good public health in this building, some great work. Why is this an offshoot? Is it? Can they do what they like, or is it just?
I think I'll let Mike answer that, because these guys are more into statistics than answering questions like that.
I'll do the second bit first. I'll choose my words carefully. Yeah, you're quite right. Move It Boom, it was not commissioned activity, so we didn't spend a public health grant on it. It is an initiative that LPT have developed themselves. I don't know where the funding for that came from, and I would have to agree. I think it's a missed opportunity to actually do things collaboratively. I think as a one-off event, you can kind of say, OK, it's got some benefit in getting kids active, and I know they partnered up with the cricket club, and it's probably a great success. I would be concerned if I thought that they were doing long-term programmes off their own bat, no pun intended, without joining up with Leicestershire and Rutland Sport and indeed ourselves. And I know I've got a number of conversations through team members making certain that that's what's happened. I mean, I would probably say there is a bit of a history that they have done that in the past. In the old days, they never used to tell us at all, whereas now we do joint publicity around it. I'd like to move that to actually doing things jointly with them from the start. So in terms of physical activity, yeah, again, you're quite right. I think we probably need to reframe it. The other thing around physical activity wasn't lost on me over summer when the BBC went to town with some very shaky early findings around the dementia drug. All the while we're sitting on a treatment and an intervention which reduces over the course of a lifetime by half your risk of dementia, and that intervention is, of course, physical activity. I rest my case.
Sean.
Thank you. Yes, I was just curious about this idea that exercise doesn't really affect obesity. And, I just had a quick look at a report from the BBC. The British Journal of Sports Medicine has editorial in there made this link, but other doctors have said it's wrong to downplay the link between exercise and reducing obesity. So I think the jury's out on that one. I think personally, I think, and I'm not an expert, that it does help to speed up your metabolism if you exercise more, and that's got to be good for keeping your weight down.
Sadly, that's not the case.
Well,
it is why you're exercising, but there's no long-term benefit.
Yeah, I just think there's more than one point of view on that.
I'll just respond. No, that's okay. I just happen to work not just in this country, around the world, and I can assure you, I go to conferences with some of the top scientists from America, from every country, and the 99% of the real sports physical movement experts will say what I've just said. But there's a political reason when it comes to food and sugar. The sugar industry is worth a lot of money. Some of the people who did the research initially were funded, etc. We can go on to it but in reality, physical activity is more important. That's what we get at. We've got some great diet programs. The healthy eating program in the schools is fantastic. But I think we need to continuously use obesity for physical activity. I just think we've got an opportunity to do it better. Maybe scare people more and say, if you don't exercise, exactly, you get dementia and you drop dead, whatever. But I just think, we've got an opportunity there to look at it differently.
I think there's two things, isn't there? There's exercise helps more than just weight, but diet is also crucial to an awful lot of other things. My only observations on this, particularly on page 114, was there's a whole load of things that I don't know what the units are, and I got a bit pedantic when I was reading this. 0.81 of a quality of life for carers, or 1 year survival for cancer was 67.4. Is that % of people who live that long? Or sorry, I just went through a load of it and I was getting a bit tired last night. And 431 people were satisfied with 431 somethings, turnips perhaps, were satisfied with the quality of consultation at GP practice. I just needs tightening up, basically, for somebody to go through them. Most of them are okay. That page in particular was very bad. And I was looking at the reds and getting a bit area-rated, sorry.
Yeah, this is all national data, but what we'll do next time is without making the report even bigger, is try and give some examples. So for, the 400 and whatever it was around, I think it's GP, is it GP? Yeah, that's out of 500, but I know that because I work with the data. So, but we'll make it more. We'll put more
on the next page with the public health stuff. It'll just say person per 100,000. Then you can go right. I know I've got an idea of the handle of it. Otherwise, it's hard for us to judge because we haven't got historical data, so you can't sort of say has it gone up. You've got the little trendy thing, but we don't know what the numbers are. So that will be useful, I think, in future. Are we done with that, people? Thank you. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to say sort of thank you for our next people have been sitting there very, very patiently for a long time. So please come forward. This is a... Don't say that. This is a review of dental health service, which is sort of out of hours. We've got... Who have we got? We've got Andrea Clark, Samina Makani, and Razia Hamoud, I think. You are from... hang on, we've got people from... Well, you best introduce yourselves, because I'm losing the will to live here. Head no tail of who works for whom. So if you care to introduce yourselves, it's much easier.
I'm Samina Makani. I'm a consultant in dental public health, and I advise and support NHS England Central Midlands, as well as the local authorities in Leicestershire, Lincolnshire and Northamptonshire.
I'm Razia Nur Mohammed. I'm the support contract manager at NHS England.
I'm Andrea Clark. I'm a senior engagement and consultation lead for Arden Gem Commissioning Support Unit, working to support these guys on this project.
Okay, I was just going to give you a quick summary of the report that you've had and the consultation that we're sort of undertaking at the moment. So NHS England Central Midlands, we're responsible for commissioning NHS dental services, primary, secondary and community services. This includes urgent and out-of-hours dental services across Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland. These contracts are time limited, and there's a requirement with procurement law and competition guidance that we have to, when they come to the end of their time, we have to procure them again. NHS England has used this opportunity to review the current arrangements, and the review found that there were gaps in service. So we have an out-of-hours service and an urgent care service, and there was a gap in time when there was no services provided. The dental access centres were originally established to improve access to urgent dental care and were originally only for short-term use. The evidence that we've had supports that we need to improve access and capacity to urgent dental care to meet our population needs. The Dental Access Centre and urgent care only provide urgent care. If a patient requires any follow-up treatments, they have to find their own dental practitioner to finish that. And at the moment, the Dental Access Centre, the surgeries aren't being fully utilised. So NHS England, we had a pre-engagement questionnaire during August and September for 6 weeks. And the findings of this, we had 254 responses on questions on general dental services and urgent care and LLR. So the findings from those questionnaires, we found that there was an equal split between people in Leicester and Leicestershire, with a small number of respondents from Rutland. The questionnaire indicated that people were willing to travel some distance for urgent dental care. The data indicated that users would prefer longer hours, so earlier appointments in the morning, later in the afternoon. And in general, there was uncertainty about how to access out-of-hours cares for many people, and a lot of people didn't really know the Dental Access Centre existed. Using information from this questionnaire and also an oral health needs assessment that we've been doing, we've come up with two options. One is for, option one is urgent care dental service, which is to use the existing site and just to merge the Dental Access Centre and the dental out-of-hours together. I'm not going to go through all the pros and cons, because that's actually in the paper that we've sort of provided. The second option is creating a new NHS urgent and routine dental care service, which would run 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. For the second option, we would have to locate some additional funding. The consultation process at the moment has been advertised in a number of places and will be carrying on until the 1st of November 2015. We also have a public meeting for the consultation on the 7th of October between 6 and 8 in the evening at the Adult Learning Centre in Leicester. The outcome of the consultation will be considered along with findings from the Oral Health Needs Assessment in late November to determine the preferred service model to be commissioned. At the moment, we've got a dental consultation email account that has been established to manage any inquiries. Hard copies of the consultation are also available in the Dental Access Centre and by contacting us.
Okay, fine, thank you. I was just thinking, actually, this is hard to consult on because the people you want to consult with are the people who aren't with a dentist and probably sort of only bother getting in touch when they've got a problem. So you're in quite a difficult position with this, but that's an aside in a way. Terry, you wanted to kick off?
I think that's a point well made, and perhaps you should ask some GPs to supply you with data from the patients who turn up to see them. But that wasn't my question. On the consultation, the LE67 postcode, which is Culver, which I represent, is assuming my geography is correct, one of the highest non-city areas accessing urgent dental care. We've just heard recently that oral health in North West Leicestershire is some of the worst outside the city. And in the consultation paper, if you look at option 2, consultees are asked where would you like it to be if it's in a market town, and we've got Loughborough, Melton, Mowbray, Hinckley, Oakham, and I thought Colville was quite a large market town. I was hoping to see it there. So I feel that given the data that you've given is a significant omission.
I think the data in there involves the people accessing the dental access centre, but we have got 2 huge big practices in Colville already. There are 2 dental practices in Colville already.
But the data here suggests that they are still going to the dental access centre.
We could add that in and into the next review, into the consultation, can't we?
Well, it's late to add it now. I suppose it's if people in that area feel that they need to have it there, is to actually putting it down as the other option.
To pick up on the point made by our chair, you're going to find it difficult to actually engage with the very people you need to engage with, because they are generally the less well organised in our society, who haven't got a dentist to access, who presumably then turn up to the dental access centre in a crisis. So I am concerned that you've already discovered that people in the LE67 postcode seem to be turning up to your dental access centre and yet haven't considered whether the LE67 postcode might be a good place to put to put one.
The consultation is available at the Dental Access Centre and is being advertised there as well. What I'll do is I'll hand over to you to just explain about the consultation.
Yeah, it is quite a difficult target group. So what we've done is trying to sort of reach people through as many outbeing as we can. So we've got a large database of seldom heard groups, and we've asked those organisations to cascade this on our behalf to try and reach people that are maybe not in the mainstream society, to try and reach as many people as we can. We have asked GPs as well to pass on the consultation and encourage people to fill it in, so that hopefully people who are going to GPs with dental problems and maybe haven't got a dentist will feed into the consultation. So quite a lot of thought's been given to how we might reach people that don't have a dentist. Hope that answers your question.
Sorry.
Kevin, sorry. You'll go Kevin and then, yeah, Alan.
On a similar vein, actually. Sorry. In the coloured diagram in the middle of the questionnaire, page 126 in our pack, population percent of urgent treatment claims for Leicestershire. You've got a list of all the districts, fine. And in fact, the Harborough district indicates outside Leicester and obviously England, it has actually the highest adult urgent percentage. And yet, OK, Harbour's not mentioned on the list, as we've just discussed Colville. But more than that, in the two black and white diagrams we have of patients accessing urgent dental care in Leicester, it doesn't mention LE16 at all. So obviously all the Harbour people must come from LE8, which is my patch. I just find a little bit concerning that we've got Harbour mentioned as one of the highest urgent needs, according to your figures, and yet we don't even have LE16 as one of the postcodes that have been looked at.
I suppose it's worth saying that the sites that were chosen weren't just based on the urgent care data. They were also based on an oral health needs assessment that covered other things, such as what services were available in the area as well. And one of the things we would be looking at, if we were going for option 2 and looking to set a practice in county, it would have to be at a site that has good transport facilities, and those are the kind of things we would be looking at. So at the moment, we haven't made any decisions at all.
Well, it needs Market Harbour on that list then. The A6 is very good.
The A50 is not bad.
Now, children. Alan, you wanted to say something?
No, I'm okay. No, it's been answered.
I mean, I did actually, not regarding the urgent care, but the specialist service stuff that I read. You don't include on that people with severe dementia, who can be quite difficult for a normal dentist to deal with, I suspect, if they become, as a few people do, they're not passive, they're more aggressive in the way their sort of condition takes them. And I just wondered if it's not mentioned in here and they are included or not. That was a thought I had while I read it.
So is that group treated by special care dentistry? Yes, they would be treated by special care dentistry. I know that Health Education England is doing some work with dentists as well, just raising the awareness of dementia as well.
Okay, that's good, thank you. Most people come passive, I'm told, but you get the odd person who goes the opposite way. Now, I think we have to give you a view, don't we, on which of the two options that we were talking about earlier we prefer. I have bids for 2 on my right, so I'll propose that our feedback to you will be that we would prefer option 2 to be seen. Are we all agreed on that? Or have no view? Oh, Sean's actually going to vote this time, right?
I actually voted, but I can't remember which one I voted.
Do you want option 2? Jeff, put your hand up if you're interested in option 2, okay? Yeah, fine. Well, that's clear. So it's going to be a long afternoon, as you know. Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting. I think we've actually got a whole thing about oral health, as you saw earlier. It's something that we find as a committee quite interesting. We've had panels on dentistry and all sorts before, so I'm not quite sure why we're so obsessed by dentists, but that's by the by. So thank you for your time and for coming. Sorry we can give you a bit more time. I will remind the committee our next meeting is on the 11th of November, and also we have others in January, March, June, September, November to put them in your diaries. There are no urgent items, so thank you very much for coming, and I will close the meeting at an epic late time.